or 7. All right, I will call to order the Board of Equalization meeting for August 18th, 2023. We have a quorum, all 5 members are present, 4 physically and 1 via Zoom. I'll hold off on the approval of minutes for last meeting until the end of the meeting. We'll go ahead and call our first case. First and only case today. This is application number 54. The property address is 250 Pantops Mountain Road, PID 32481. The owner is Westminster Canterbury of the Blue Ridge. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is James Downey, attorney. My office is in Warrenton, and I represent Westminster Canterbury of the Blue Ridge on this appeal. And seated to my left is Anna Buchanan. She is the Chief Financial Officer of Westminster Canterbury. And also Mr. Dennis Rooker is here. He is the Chairman of the Board of Westminster Canterbury at this time. Appreciate your attention to this very important case. Show you first what we intend to prove.
Before, if I may, before we start, I will need to swear in everyone. So let me just make sure I have everything. I don't think I need to go through the introductions. I think you all are full aware of what we do and who we are in terms of the Board of Equalization. And feel free to sit down or stand up, however you'd like for your presentation. I don't believe, what were the, how long did you all agree to in terms of presentation timing? Because I know this one we approved a longer presentation.
So we had discussed you had approved a 90-minute hearing.
Right.
Now we have nothing after this, so there is some leeway.
Okay.
And Mr. Downey and I discussed timing also for the presentation. But Mr. Downey, what would you? I know we talked this morning.
Well, the way this seems to develop is with that time constraint of an hour and a half, the total. We have tried to prepare our presentation in 45 minutes available to us. And we know that that's going to be difficult. We are going to strive for that. And we ask you for your indulgence in the event that we do go a little over that. It's up to you, of course. And I've spoken with Mr. Lynch about that. And he feels that this is a complicated case. And so long as you have the time, we must appreciate it. But we're going to try to work with you.
Well, we appreciate it. And I think for the most part, we're generally pretty well prepared as well. The materials that you've provided to us, we have reviewed ahead of time. So just, but please feel free. And then also how we usually do this is you'll have your presentation, the assessor will have theirs, and then you'll have an opportunity for rebuttal as well. And we may ask questions during the process. So let me go ahead and swear everyone in who's going to be testifying, and then we'll go ahead and start. So everyone's will be testifying, please raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony with oral and documentary which you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Any questions before we proceed?
Yes.
Please proceed.
Very well. I won't go over what I just said about who we are. So we'll take that from there. And I will need to stand now and then, and because I have the charts and mounting board. But basically, as you probably do in your submissions here, this is an appeal from an assessment that is presently $160,169,000. We claim that it should not be increased above the value for last year, which was $131,287,900. Before I go any further, I want to point out to you, I have placed at each of your seats there a manila folder that has in it the exhibits that we propose to introduce that are actually a couple of them in addition. There are supplemental exhibits beyond what was in the blue notebook that was our appeal presentation. So I wanted you to know that we will be working from an outline, which is the first thing in your manila folder. I've made an outline of the presentation, and we intend to follow that outline in our presentation. Now, let me go to this first flip chart. As I've said, The assessment in question is this very radical 24% jump from last year. 160 versus 131. And we claim that there's no justification for this increase. And that it should be reduced to the prior year value. The bottom line of this appeal. Ms. Buchanan is going to explain to you in a little more detail the property so that you'll have everything correctly in your mind. But the basic overview is that there are 60 residential units that are essentially around the perimeter of the property. We call those cottages or villas. And there are 5 commercial units that are mostly in the center of the property. The increases for each of these are 8,467,600 on the residential portion, and 20,416,500 on the commercial portion. So these are the two increases. The total are roughly 29 million that we're asking to have reduced. And the basic grounds of our appeal what happened. The assessor took the residential portion and eliminated 20% functional obsolescence. Now, I'm not sure that this is actually in the filed materials. Some of these things evolve as we continue to talk. I would like to compliment Mr. Lynch, being courteous all the way through. We were able to fine tune a lot of things, and it wasn't 100% clear as of the time the appeal was actually filed that this particular ground was as important as I believe it is. So that number that you saw is the increase in the residential portion was the result of taking out 20% functional obsolescence that had been in these assessments for many years and leaving us with a reduction in an increase of roughly 20%. Now, for the commercial, as it talks like that was he updated this Marshall and Swift valuation from the valuation manual and just added to the reproduction cost new an amount that increased this assessment roughly the same amount as the residential. We claim here also there is functional and external obsolescence in the commercial part as well. He didn't actually take it out. It wasn't in there in the first place. It's something that has not been given sufficient attention in the assessment process. So our claim is going to be that we have functional and external obsolescence, which we can show, that would result in essentially 20% being put back in on the commercial portion as well as the residential portion. Another ground, we have essentially 4 grounds. Failure to conduct an income analysis. Now, the case law is very clear that the 3 approaches have to be attempted. And if you're not going to use one of them, say the income approach, there has to be a good reason for that. Sometimes the sales approach is not used and there's a reason that can be shown, or the cost approach. In this case, no income analysis was performed. And if it had been performed, it would have shown that there's no grounds whatsoever to ramp up an assessment when the income to the property is not increasing. It's actually at a level number. And if that had been considered, it would have been a cross-check against these other 2 grounds of increase. So the 3rd ground is the not performing income analysis, or even looking at the income information. 4th, uniformity. Buchanan has prepared a table that shows for other homes for the elderly, the increases have been more in the 4% range, while ours is in the 24% range. Now, just placing this one more time in its historical context. If you read the Lenhoff appraisal, you may have noticed that historically, the assessments for this property have been roughly 130 million, 126, 100. There were a couple of years where it was up as high as 136 or 138. We thought those were outliers, but the assessment has perked along for a long time, right around 130. And so all of a sudden we see this 24% increase, which is absolutely radical. And so we're here to ask that it be reduced back to the prior year. Now, Ms. Buchanan will take over to a great extent here and present our evidence by reference to the points that I've made here. That would be the nature of our case. I'll now turn it to Ms. Buchanan, and let me begin in kind of a courtroom style, which I don't want to keep with any more than necessary. But I'll ask her to identify herself. State your name, please. Ms. Buchanan, can you tell the board a little bit about your educational background and experience
Yes.
leading up to your present job?
Good morning, everyone. I am Anna Buchanan, the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer for Westminster Canterbury, the Blue Ridge. My educational background is an undergraduate degree in engineering. I have a master's of business administration from the Darby School here at the University of Virginia. I've been the CFO and Treasurer of Westminster Canterbury, the Blue Ridge for 4.5 years. Previous roles include 14 years at Martha Jefferson Hospital, Sentara Martha Jefferson Hospital, where I was responsible for the financial planning effort for the replacement hospital as well as the merger with Sentara. So 7 years with Martha Jefferson, 7 years with Sentara. Prior to my current role, I was in the acute care setting as a CFO for the Eastern region of WMS, and I'm an Albemarle County resident.
You wish to introduce the case any further? Explaining how you came to believe this deal is necessary.
I'll make an opening statement and then I'm going to walk you through the property and orient you to the various commercial and residential. Once again, I want to thank you for your time this morning. I wanted to also indicate that our president and CEO, Gary Selmese, would otherwise be here. He is with family at a memorial service for a close family member. I also would like to thank Mr. Lynch and his staff for their cooperation with our team. We have very high regard for Mr. Lynch and his role. We understand he has a duty to perform for the community. I'd like to describe our community. We know that our community is not well understood, and so I'm going to take a moment to describe Westminster Canterbury of the Blue Ridge. We are a nonprofit, continuing care retirement community. We provide long-term care and services to approximately 450 older adults. Throughout my comments today, I will refer to Westminster Canterbury of the Blue Ridge as WCBR. It's shorter, a little easier. While we share similarity with other Westminster Canterburys in the Commonwealth, we are not related in organization, in funding, in any kind of corporate structure. We are a single site CCRC here in Charlottesville. We are licensed by the Virginia Department of Social Services as an assisted living facility. We are licensed by the Virginia Department of Health as a skilled nursing facility. We are a registered provider with the State Corporation Commission Bureau of Insurance. WCBR operates a long-term care insurance program with guaranteed and unlimited access to care, a care continuum, without a change in a basic monthly fee. So think of us as offering long-term care insurance in a residential setting. We employ approximately 300 associates who provide care and services across 4 residential settings on a 56-acre campus. The residential settings include independent living, we call catered living, and Vista, our assisted living and memory care units, and our health center, which provides skilled nursing care and long-term convalescent care. WCBR was organized in 1985 and we opened our doors in 1990. The purpose of our founding was, and I quote from our Articles of Incorporation, to establish and operate housing and healthcare facilities in a manner designed to meet the needs of elderly persons. Our tax-exempt purpose is to ensure health and care of the elderly. In the assessor's records, WCBR is considered a home for the elderly. We are not a multifamily property. We offer no rental options. As WCBR fiduciary, I have a duty to manage the tax liability for WCBR. We aim to pay our fair share of property taxes and no more. We're challenging the 2023 assessment for a number of reasons that we are outlining for you today. I'm going to walk through the map and orient you to the commercial properties as well as the residential properties, and so we're following along in the outline. This is the map of our campus, the main entrance. The smaller buildings at the periphery are cottages. Mr. Lynch and his comments may refer to those as villas, and we refer to those as cottages. The connected larger buildings are apartment buildings, care buildings, and our common area buildings, and those would be considered the commercial. So I'm going to begin walking through a description of functional and external obsolescence. I'm going to start with the cottage properties, and so just to orient you, we have 60 cottage units. Some of those are duplexes and some of those are single standalone cottages. The oldest cottages on our campus are the Jefferson Cottages in this neighborhood. The hillside cottages are the tan and brown. We have 2 generations of hillside cottages. We have a total of 30. 25 of those are older hillside cottages in this central part. The newest cottages are 5 freestanding hillside cottages near the entrance. And then finally, we have Albemarle cottages, which are 10 units, 5 duplex units. In the manila folder that is in front of you, I'm referring to Exhibit A, and I will walk through functional deficiencies.
Exhibit A is stapled to the document that is entitled Outline of Presentation.
I'd like to do a sound check for Mr. Mayo. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes, it was a little unclear towards the beginning of the gentleman sitting next to you, the first part of his speech, but I think maybe because you're nearer the microphone, you're very clear. So if we could maybe drift that down the table towards both of them, I think that might solve all the issues that did exist, but I can hear you clearly.
Thank you for the suggestion. That's your microphone. I think it's.
I'm not tied into that, so.
Okay, then in the middle there.
Oh, so is that.
I'll move over if I speak. Maybe that
So I think if you just speak a little louder, I think we should be
Okay.
fine.
So turning to Exhibit A, the title says cottages, total of 60 units. It has a table. I'm going to walk through the table. And again, the Jefferson cottages are the oldest cottages. These were built in 1990. They are 33 years old. We have a total of 20 Jefferson cottages. The map on the board indicates 20 Jefferson units. These again are our oldest cottages. They are vinyl siding, have no garages, have a colonial style that is not in keeping with contemporary design. We've had to update these with different design technique and arts and crafts style, add larger windows, etc. They have small compartmentalized floor plans. They are not open. They have less flexible room arrangements. They are typically 1,300 square feet, and there's no generator backup to these cottages. We originally started with 40 Jefferson cottages, and over time we've found we've needed to replace these cottages as they were not competitive with market demand. Our next generation of cottages are the hillside cottages. They're 25. They offer a single car garage and again have no generator backup. The Albemarle cottages were added in 2008. We replaced 10 Jefferson cottage units with 10 Albemarle cottages, which I will point out that's not an accretive addition when we have simply replaced 10 units with 10 units. There's no generator backup in the Albemarles. And in 2016, we built those newer hillside cottages, and in fact, eliminated 8 Jefferson cottages, 4 duplexes, and replaced that with 5 freestanding cottages. As Mr. Downey outlined, these cottages, which are all treated somewhat similarly in the valuation approach by the assessor, we've seen a 58% increase in cottages in 1 year. We've seen an 80% increase in the value of these cottages, the assessed value of these cottages since 2020. Removal of the 20% functional obsolescence in one fell swoop has resulted in a significant increase. We've made no changes in the number of cottages, the significant attributes of cottages, We've made no other changes other than renovations, routine renovations associated with unit turnover. Important to note, we are a life care community. We provide care across the entire continuum. Cottages for us are no different from apartments. It is a life care continuum that begins in independent living and proceeds through care areas. In terms of the cottages and other elements of functional obsolescence, we do have the ability to fill cottages with a wait list or people who are interested in living in a more freestanding environment. However, it's more challenging. Our wait list is not as long for cottages. We have more market pressure on filling cottages. Apartments are definitely the more desirable residential unit. They're under roof, they're connected with amenities, they're accessible to dining, they're accessible to healthcare areas. In terms of other factors that would be in the category of external economic obsolescence, the operating cost burden for our cottages are extensive, including utilities, groundskeeping, repairs, maintenance. Our emergency 24/7 response to support residents in cottages is more difficult in their various locations. We provide transportation for residents, and more of our transportation expense and need to staff transportation is related to cottages. We have inclement weather plans and keeping the sidewalks and response to residents safe and supporting their meal needs during inclement weather. And other demands on our staff when needing to respond to remote cottages. The cottage systems are not scalable. Each cottage is individually equipped with its intercom, phone line, HVAC, the list goes on. We can't scale the cottage systems as we do the apartment buildings and the main buildings. Renovation costs on cottages are higher. We have both interior and exterior demands on the renovation budget. And we have the opportunity for, lots of individualized requests around fences and sidewalks and such. There's a greater likelihood for an internal move within our community from a cottage to an apartment. And within our long-term care continuum model, that's not a positive economic factor if someone moves from a cottage to an apartment, as opposed to the natural progression is from an independent living unit to a care area. So we have more internal moves occurring because we have cottages. That's an economic burden. The future outlook for cottages, WCBR, is not strong. We will build more apartments. It's unlikely to build cottages. So what I have done is outline for you some pressures we have from functional obsolescence of cottages, economic obsolescence of cottages. These cottages have been treated very similarly in the valuation method used by the assessor. And they are very, very different. They are not all the same. They're very different.
Did you also look at the commercial segment of the property and do a similar analysis of that?
Yes, I did. And I would ask you to turn to Exhibit B, which is next in the package. Exhibit B, I will walk through very similarly. We've grown over a long time. As I mentioned, we formed in '85. We opened our doors in 1990. So through this table presented in front of you, I will outline the various generations of our main buildings, including the first of which was the Monticello apartment building. Originally, we had 81 Monticello apartments. These were small, many one-bedroom apartments. We have 64 today, and we will be going to less than 60 apartments in Monticello through unit combinations.
Just to orient again, the Monticello is the building that is in kind of a turquoise color right in the center.
That's correct. It's labeled F and G. I could direct your attention to the list of challenges we have with a 33-year-old building. And again, I won't read every single line on here, but essentially, these are dated. They have 8-foot ceilings. They have PTAC units. They are smaller than desirable in all features in terms of their not being modern. The floors in this building are not concrete. They have a little bit of sag or sway. The sound insulation is not as good as we would like for it to be. Certainly, leaves some opportunities there. And we have limitations on generator support, power backup, in the Monticello units. They don't come with washer dryers. They don't have dedicated parking spaces. They don't have in-unit laundry unless we've done a combination to provide that. The assessor's record shows that these are marked as excellent. And in this year from 22 to 23, we've had a 14% change in cost. We've had 11% increase in value due to the removal of depreciation or an adjustment to depreciation. We've had a 40% change in the assessment. This 33-year-old building has changed in value, assessed value, by more than $6 million from 22 to 23. Moving to our healthcare in Vista building, which on the map in front of you is located at items C and D to the left center of the map. Items C and D are the healthcare and Vista building.
Yellow, they're yellow. You can't see the C and D from way back there, I don't think, correct?
These are 28 or 33 years of age. This is part of our care continuum. We have 52 licensed nursing home beds and 12 Vista memory care units in this healthcare area. It's our original healthcare building and in need of replacement. Rooms are small, have 8-foot ceilings, PTAC heating and cooling units, small windows. There's an inability to combine them, and the floor to ceiling clearances also make them very difficult for contemplating an in-place renovation to a health center. We have constrained space for our clinic and PT areas. We have inadequate staff space and very little supply and equipment and storage space. These buildings are also considered excellent in the assessor's record. In 22 to 23, the change in cost was a 24% increase. The depreciation removed impacted value by 20%. The overall change in assessment is a 26% increase for $1.2 million in the change of value of this building. Moving to our catered living building, which is 23 years old, there are 45 assisted living units in catered living. It is noted in the orange color. Item E on the map in front of you is our catered living building. Again, we have small rooms here, smaller than what the market offers for assisted living residences. Some are just efficiencies, not even one bedrooms. They have, this building has 3 small dining rooms on 3 floors. They are operationally difficult. They are disconnected from our main kitchen. The narrow connector that you can see between E and D is a less than desirable narrow ramped walkway between the 2 buildings. It connects on 1 floor only. That creates operational challenges to supporting the building. Meals are served 3 times a day in catered living, 3 times a day in healthcare in Vista. This building likewise is listed as excellent in the assessor's record. There's been an 8% cost increase, a 28% depreciation decrease, 15% change in assessed value. This 23-year-old building with no additions, no improvements, no updates has increased nearly $1.2 million, $1.188 million from 22 to 23. Our Blue Ridge apartment building is indicated by A on the map. It's lavender at the top. It's this larger apartment building with wings on either side. Blue Ridge apartment building has 121 units, and some of the floor plans here are require opening with kitchens that are too small, definitely not open in terms of the what would be expected in a modern market. This building has original roof, gutters, soffits in need of repair. It's a 20-year-old building. We're facing significant maintenance issues coming up with needing to invest in the Blue Ridge building. The roof on this building will be over $1 million, probably closer to 1.5. Gutters and soffits and repairs that are needed in this building are quoted and planned at $500,000. So it's a very, very high cost burden. This property is listed as high in the county's record. It has a 12% cost increase. This one does have a 40% depreciation decrease, a 24% change in assessed value for $13 million change in value for Blue Ridge. Finally, turning to the next page, which is our penthouse building. This is our newest apartment building. At item J and I and H of the, it's on the yellow to the right-hand side, right center, that is Cantop's apartment building. This is our newest apartment building, and so the point to make here is that because we had begun the process in 2012 of apartment combinations in Monticello, again, we started with 81 Monticello apartments, and we began combining them because 600 square feet, one-bedroom apartments were unmarketable. The direct result of needing to combine Monticello apartments and reduce the unit count is what drove us to increase the unit count in Cantop's. We've essentially returned inventory to our property, combining Monticello's and reducing the number of units. This building is listed as excellent. It's had an 8% cost increase, a 4% depreciation decrease, a 13% change in assessment, for $2.87 million of increase. Overall, not having made any new improvements, there are no new buildings on our campus. We renovate units when they turn over. We do have capital investments that would be considered maintenance capital. We spend $5 to $6 million a year on routine maintenance items. It's a large building, a large set of buildings on our campus. We've made no new improvements from 22 to 23. We've seen a 12% cost increase, 22% depreciation decrease, where for years, a depreciation method was utilized for our property that for some reason from 22 to 23 changed. 23% change and 22.2% in the overall assessment, 24% on improvements, a $20 million change in our assessed value. Turning to the next few pages, external economic obsolescence. 4. Our communities. So I'm not speaking specifically about cottages or apartments, but in terms of offering life care. I will describe for you, as I have described for Mr. Lynch and his team, what costs are associated with providing life care. We offer a long-term care setting and service to residents who live to Westminster Canterbury of the Blue Ridge to live there for the rest of their lives. We offer, and I will also note, because we are an insurance product and model and service, we use actuarial computations, actuarial support. So just as an insurance company, we manage risk and understand what are future costs we must be prepared to cover. We use an actuary throughout the year for budget purposes, for price setting, and for our audit requires the use of the actuary. We have a $73 million future service obligation based upon that actuarial computation. We have over $30 million in refund obligations associated with our refundable contract. And so it is important that we have a conservative method for managing our finances and that we use this actuarial science for the long-term view of what are the risks and future costs and obligations. By offering life care, we must have care areas available to our residents for any care continuum movements. Again, monthly fee does not change as the resident would move from independent living to a care area. They are basically eliminating risk for needing future care and ensuring that couples can stay together and move into our community. Our life care contract guarantees assisted living, memory care, and nursing care, a clinic, a medical director, and therapy services. We have very high operating expense associated with life care. The residential services component of the agreement guarantees dining, special dietary support, transportation. We provide routine transportation for medical appointments, getting groceries, going to church, memorial services, events that are organized. We provide housekeeping and linen service, 24/7 emergency response. We provide all utilities for the units, groundskeeping, repairs and maintenance, storage, parking, activities and social events. Importantly, we offer financial support, and it is in our life care contract. No resident has ever had to leave WCDR for outliving their financial resources. We make a contractual commitment and obligation in our life care agreement that should, through no fault of their own, a resident outlive their life expectancy, they will never need to leave WCBR. We provide fellowship support to residents. In over 30 years, we provided $6 million in fellowship support to residents, and that's not inflation adjusted. If we were to inflation adjust that figure, it would probably be near $20 million, $6 million over 30 years in terms of fellowship support. It's in our contract. We also provide fitness and aquatics and on-site bank, social workers, a chaplain, and many, many other services. Another factor to consider within external economic obsolescence is that we have a very limited market. Residents must qualify to engage in the contract. They must be 62 years old. There's an age qualification. Non-smokers, we have a medical evaluation as part of qualification, as well as a financial disclosure and qualification so that we know what risk we're taking on. So that essentially concludes the walkthrough of functional obsolescence and external obsolescence, which is one of our key points in appealing this change in value from 22 to 23. I'd like to drill a little bit deeper into the income pressure. Turn to the next page. I would like to describe specific to 22 and 23, pressure on operating income on all our margins. We, for a number of years, have had a 2.5% or 3% fee increase, even in this inflationary environment. We've had a 3% fee increase to residents, and that is implemented every July 1, their monthly fee increases by 3%. In the 6-month period ended December 31, 22, and I state that because our fiscal year runs July 1 to June 30. Our operating expense growth is over 10%. Mr. Lynch was kind enough to have us meet with him. We proceeded with meetings, during the administrative process of this review. And we met with Mr. Lynch, Ms. Collier, and Ms. Taylor on March 16th. We showed a 24% deterioration of operating cash flow for the period ended 12/31/22. The table in front of you is directly from the internal P&L statement summarizing independent living resident fees, care area resident fees, and the 6-month year-over-year comparison. While revenue has increased in that 6-month year-over-year comparison, note departmental operating expense well exceeded that with the growth we've seen in this inflationary environment. Computing operating cash flow and excluding interest, you can see we had a $242,000 deterioration of that operating cash flow. Including interest expense, you'll note our cash flow, our P&L cash flow is negative. We operate on a very thin margin, again, needing to be conservative in planning for the future. So the entrance fees and monthly fees together help us make this work from an actuarial perspective. During that March 16th meeting, we attempted to further explore the use of an income approach to further explain our finances, our financial model, and some of the risk that we take on. Ms. Lynch declined that opportunity to continue to go further in understanding our financial our financials. And I can speak more to that if necessary. We've had a very high renovation expense for independent living turnovers in this inflationary environment. 22 cost for renovation. So with the turns of units and needing to renovate those for new residents, we've had a very steep increase in the cost of materials, labor, supplies of 60% over 2021. Furthermore, in December of 22, occupancy was still well below pre-pandemic levels. The table in front of you shows the main residential areas of our community, and it shows historical years, year-to-date December 2019. So that's fiscal year 20 for us, but in December of 19, that's pre-pandemic. And you can see our occupancy levels across independent living, catered living, Vista, healthcare, and total. So that's our pre-pandemic level of occupancy. In fiscal year 21, we declined. In fiscal year 20, we declined. In fiscal year 21, 22, 23 for the 6 months ended December of 2021, 22. You can see the trend in independent living occupancy. Finally, I'll state, we make no money on care areas. So the independent move-ins, independent living move-ins and movement through the care continuum is a key driver in our ability to afford expenses and the future risk. You can see in the information provided to Mr. Lynch and his team for the December, pardon me, that's a typo, that's 22, December of 2022, 6 months, or fiscal year 23. Care areas is money. Care areas is $3.59 million of care area resident fees and over $4 million of expense, $500,000 in 6 months. That's with care area occupancy of 79%.
Now, before you move to the exhibit C, which deals with the uniformity question, I would ask you to, on the same subject of income,
Yes.
there is an exhibit in your folio that is a spreadsheet of income in property. It's not numbered though. Ask you to just, you've got, no, it's and this is an exhibit that's entitled, you know, it doesn't have a title, but it's Mr. Canterbury. Line number references is shown there right to the right of the name of the facility. If you all have that. All right. Now, we can, orienting your presentation to this particular spreadsheet, can you explain to the board what you have developed here for their benefit?
Yes. So this is Exhibit D, and I will move through this quickly, but this information is publicly available. We've shared audited financial information with Mr. Lynch. The columns represented on this Exhibit D are from our audited financial statements for the fiscal years presented 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. I've also shown the internal financials for the 6 months ended December 31, 22. And while I've annualized that, so the final column to the right is the doubling of 6 months, 22 for comparability. We could all probably share an opinion on whether that annualization is something you know, that is comparable, but for the purposes of giving you something to compare, because we showed Mr. Lynch that 6 months ended December over year over year. We're not increasing in income. We're not increasing in income. Straight from our audited financials, this presents revenue, 2 categories: patient and resident service revenue, other revenue, total operating revenue, our departmental operating expenses, depreciation, amortization, and interest. So our operating income in a typical year is $3 to $4 million. Fiscal year 22 was higher for investment income. Our operating EBITDA is typically, and I exclude investment income and contributions because that would not be considered into computing net operating income. Our EBITDA, excluding investments and contributions, is right at $13 million, and it hasn't changed. In the 22 period, fiscal year 22 audited, we were at $13.4 million. In the year to date, 23, fiscal year 23, which is the 6 months ended December 31st of 2022, which is immediately preceding the assessment, we've dropped. We annualized to $12.9 million in annualized operating EBITDA less investments and contributions. So compared to 22, compared to a 3-year average, there is no increase in income during this period leading up to the assessment.
All right, now moving to the question of uniformity now directly, try to keep moving along here. Did you prepare an exhibit that shows comparisons of increases in other homes for the elderly to Malvern County?
Yes, I did. That is Exhibit C. Exhibit C is the legal sheet is out as such.
Now, I have inserted in the folio a more readable larger version. We have smaller black and white. The one that I think was most useful is the one with the- All right.
This information I compiled from the GIS website, the county's GIS website. And moving through this table, it presents properties in Albemarle County. The group at the top are multifamily properties, apartments, properties that are dissimilar to Westminster Canterbury of the Blue Ridge. And you can see we all know from press release, et cetera, and this demonstrates multifamily properties increased 25 to 30% in Albemarle County. The middle section of this table is the category called convalescent hospital within the county's database. And these are essentially nursing homes. And we're comparable to nursing homes because we have a 52-bed health center, which is licensed as a nursing home in the Commonwealth. So Charlottesville Health and Rehab, the Laurels and Albemarle Health Rehabilitation Center are direct comparisons for the 52-bed health center on our campus. Heritage Inn is actually assisted living and memory care and might better be considered a home for the elderly. That's defined convalescent hospitals as listed by the county. And you can see on the improvements increase as you scan across the page where it shows the difference in land value, the difference in improvements assessed. It's less than 5%, 7.4% for Charlottesville Health and Rehab. These nursing homes and their improvement values did not increase anywhere near the level of our overall assessment increase or our health center's assessment increase. Moving to the third group on this table, and I will skip the first one, which was there just for reference. Colonnade Retirement Village, Our Lady of Peace, Commonwealth Senior Living, Morningside of Charlottesville, Rosewood Village, Lodge at Old Trail, Linden House, and the Lake. These are very similar to Westminster Canterbury, the Blue Ridge, in that they offer 3 levels, and in some cases 4 levels of care, as we do. Independent living, assisted living, and memory care for the majority. And for Colonnade Retirement Village, Colonnades offers 4 levels of care, as we do. Where we differ from Colonnades is in our contract model, and that we provide life care. We provide the lifetime commitment to residents, where the Colonnades is more of a fee-for-service model, and they do not take on the level of risk that we take on in providing long-term care. The Colonnades will not have a large future service obligation and refund liability nearly to the extent that Westminster Canterbury of the Blue Ridge has on our balance sheet. Noting the change in value for these homes for the elderly, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, Westminster Canterbury, the Blue Ridge is a home for the elderly, and our property is indicated on the blue shaded lines of this exhibit C. Within homes for the elderly, the improvements increases across these properties in Albemarle County. Many of them are 4.2%, 4.3%, 4.5%. 6.2%, 8.2%. Comparing to Westminster Canterbury of the Blue Ridge, a home for the elderly at 250 Pantops Mountain Road, our improvements increased 24.2%, 22 to 23. Again, I will emphasize we've added no new buildings. These are through changes made to depreciation and cost computations.
Believe you're being treated fairly in reference to other homes for the elderly properties.
Something is different. Something is different in how our property has been assessed in comparison to homes for the elderly. We're a nonprofit, and I conclude that this is not uniform in how our property has been valued and how other homes for the elderly have been treated differently and fair assessment process from 22 to 20.
Very well. Now, Mr. Chairman, that concludes Mr. Buchanan's testimony. There are a few housekeeping items that wouldn't say require testimony, but I want to point to certain things in the exhibits. First of all, I have included in your folio the a long sheet that shows the assessment per property, per the 60 residential, per 5 commercial, both for 22 and 23. You'll see those blue highlights, the green coloration. Those charts are actually Mr. Lynch's office produced those to show exactly what the numbers are for each property. And the 23 year, it actually does show the depreciation reduction for that year. And I also have provided you with a chart. It's also not a numbered exhibit, Mr. Marsali. I see that's right at the top of what you're looking at. There's a chart there that compares 22 and 23 in terms of what depreciation was used in 23 and what was used in 22. And also what the difference is in terms of the increase for each of the commercial properties. So that you can have at your fingertips without digging into the actual assessment cards, the actual composite numbers. And Mr. Lynch and I worked to try to simplify that so that there's no misunderstanding about what these depreciation calculations are. Nevertheless, I have produced, just for the sake of thoroughness, for the record, complete printouts of the cards. And I'm not saying that you should actually go through all the cards, but it seemed to me for a complete record, the actual cards ought to be in the record. Now these, I did make 8 of these. They're just too bulky. But I had one set of the cards for the 2 years for the residential only. Now in your folio, you have the cards actually produced 8 times over, 5 for you all, extras for other people, but you have the cards for the commercial in your actual materials. And then you have the summary of that in the computation sheet that I've provided to you. So with your permission, I would like to have these cards in the record just for the sake of being in the record. And these are the cards for the residential for 22 and 23. If you please. Now, lastly, you have in your materials that I provided excerpts from the Marshall and Swift cost manual, and the Marshall and Swift contains text material that guides the application of functional and external obsolescence. And I would just invite your attention to these as the standards by which Ms. Buchanan has tried to align her testimony to show you that the kinds of things that she's pointed out definitely fall within the definitions of functional and external obsolescence. And importantly, at the overview portion of the manual, it provides that any abnormal or excessive functional and any or all external obsolescence are considered separately and are not included in the tables. So when the tables are used to compute obsolescence, or to compute, no, not obsolescence, depreciation on an age life basis, the tables are like a mechanical process. How old is it? And then, of course, a judgment has to be applied. What is the economic age? It might be 50 years old, but it's all upgraded, so it's deemed to be less than 50 years old. So that happens. And when you see a 13% used as the depreciation after adjusting for that factor, what you'll see in the use of the tables is that kind of thing. That's what Mr. Lynch has done. What we're saying is that all of these other things have to be considered separately. They are not just something you say, well, it's my judgment that I picked it all up. No, the manual says if there's functional and external, something more has to be deducted for that factor. And what we've tried to show you is that this factor, these elements, have not been taken into consideration. They have not been shown separately on any of the cards. And that's why I've included this excerpt from Marshall and Swift in your materials so that you can actually read what Marshall says about these elements of obsolescence in depreciation. So this concludes. We would like to reserve, and I appreciate you allowing us to go a bit over. You can see it's very difficult for us to quite get this into 45 minutes. We're not that far over that, but we would like to reserve the right, opportunity to speak at the end. Ms. Buchanan would like to sum up and at the very end, after all the testimony, that's all right with you. With that, then we rest our case. We believe we've shown you that there's been a disregard and no basis in physical improvement or in income or any other way for this assessment to have increased by 24% over the prior year. And that the income was not considered, which was shown, there's nothing ramping up in the operation side of it. And so in the uniformity, there's something awry here. There's something really disturbing about an increase like this when all the other homes were there, they're just going right along as usual. Not all of them at 4%, but most of them 4, 6, 8, mostly around 4. So why are we? What justification? What possible justification is there for this increase? We don't see it. We ask for relief. That concludes our case.
George, before I have you get started, obviously we have these. Do you have any
Those were
objection?
provided by me
Okay.
to the
These are
applicant.
the cards for each of the properties, no objection. Okay, so obviously we don't go through the formalities of evidence here as we do in court, but we will admit these and review these as well. To the extent necessary. Mr. Lynch, before you do get started, is anybody on the board or otherwise need a break before we keep going? It's good. Y'all are good. Okay, so the assessor's office then.
Thank you. So as Ms. Buchanan said, make sure I'm speaking up. The mission of Westminster Canterbury as a home for the elderly is to provide housing for those elderly, senior citizens. But I would add with means. I mean, this is not a charitable, like bring us all your poor and needy. This is a property that only accepts people that have the means to pay for this long-term care and the basically rent to live in this property, and which we talk about quality of this property. It is excellent. So I want to make sure, and I'll get to kind of the cost approach in a little bit, but the description of this property as excellent is appropriate. Now, parts of this property are older and they're not necessarily in excellent condition. So I always want to make sure that there's a difference between quality and condition. And when we talk about excellent, which we definitely call the commercial parts of this property, excellent quality, that is what we're referring to. So also, I have a problem with this being this property being just considered the same as long-term care insurance. I mean, this is a residence for these people. There's this component of healthcare that goes along with it, which is included in this very complex income, model. But it is a place for them to live for the rest of their lives. So they're, whether you call it rent or not, they are paying an upfront fee and a monthly fee, and at least some of that, if not most of that, covers rent for them to live there. So, so I want to talk about, because there's some, wasn't necessarily said today, but there's some information that was provided in advance that was concerning, it was kind of a critique of the assessment. And there was some information regarding whether the work that we did on the assessment was supportable, was it in compliance with USPAP, all of these kind of assertions. So I first want to say that, USPAP applies to appraisers. USPAP Standard 5 applies to mass appraisal. But besides Standard 5 and the development of a mass appraisal, USPAP has a competency rule, it has a scope of work rule, it has a jurisdictional exception rule. Now that jurisdictional exception rule generally tends to apply to assessor's office more than anybody else, because we have very specific laws that we have to follow and requirements that we have to do. We have 49,000 properties to assess every year, not just this one. Albeit this one is the most valuable taxable property in the county. So, you know, obviously, I think the only one more valuable is non-taxing would be the university. So, but, you know, we have a responsibility to assess this property appropriately along with the other 49,000. While we have different legal mandates, our work procedures, workloads are different than someone doing a fee appraisal, which these two appraisals that were provided to you are fee appraisals. What the work we do is not in conflict with USPAP in any way. Also, and I'm going to talk about this very briefly, but it comes down to something I'll talk about when we talk about why we did not develop the income approach. But we have gone back. So I also want to make sure that, you know, I notified you as when I sent you all the information. There is a pending lawsuit. Mr. Downey has filed for 2017 to 2022 assessments. This is in circuit court. And we've been going through this litigation for a couple of years now, I believe. And it is, and the reason why this is important is because it's what I learned and my office learned during this process about this property that caused the changes in this assessment. So we are not saying that this property is more valuable by 22% this year than it was last year. We are saying that our assessment last year was too low, and we have corrected that assessment. We have corrected the way we're doing the assessment now so that we have gotten rid of parts of the adjustments we've made, and we're now coming up with an appropriate value based on the fact that we've learned from what was going on with this lawsuit, the information that was discussed during that lawsuit. And that's an important difference to understand. We're, you know, when we're looking at comparable properties, and these are a limited comparison because of the entrance fees of this property and the amount of money or the amount of value or assessment change of those properties compared to this one this year, it's not comparable because there's a totally different reason why the assessment went up in the Westminster Canterbury this year. So the issues, as I see them, is the complexity of this property. The application of the income approach, and as you see, if you've reviewed these appraisals that were provided, the income approach is very complex. The income streams are very complex. Ms. Buchanan talked about the liability of for long-term care in their balance sheet. She didn't also point out that there's $75 million, $75 million in cash and investments that they hold. Talk about Colonnade not being a comparable. Colonnade doesn't have that liability, but they also don't have $75 million in assets to cover that liability. So there's a total difference in the way those properties are run. And why that's important is the complexity of this property is so much higher because of that. And I'm going to get to some details about that when I talk more specifically about the income approach. So I've provided to you an appraisal that was done by Jim Telleton in IRR, was the Integra Realty Advisors. And he came up with a value, a market value, a fee simple market value of $178,035,000 for 2023. That was effective January 2023. That's after, now he did an income approach, he did a sales comparison approach, he did a cost approach. So that $178 million was after he deducted through his very complex calculations. A deduction for FF&E and for intangible assets, which is basically your going concern. So it's called different things by different appraisers. And Mr. Lenhoff calls it going concern. And Mr. Telleton is referring to it in his value report as intangible assets. It's all really the same thing. So Mr. Telleton came up with a cost value of 169,650. 169,650,000. His sales comparison approach and talking about, so we did not develop a sales comparison approach. And if you look at his comparables, these are comparables that they had some really detailed information on. We're in California, Colorado. There's certainly nothing in Virginia. There's Florida. I can't remember if there were other states involved there, but they're all over the nation. The direct cap income approach, the DCF income approach, we do not develop a DCF typically in assessor's offices. The complexity of that is, it's been discussed in court. And typically, there's too much complexity, and not just complexity, but so many options, so many variables that it's difficult to rely on that approach. But that was part of it's part of what a typical fee appraiser would do in a cost and income approach. And of course, those values that were determined, 223 million, 238 million, 229 million for the sales and the two different income approaches that Mr. Telleton provided, then has the going concern and FF&E deducted from that to get it down to a fee simple market value for the realty only. Mr. Lenhoff, on the other hand, did a cost approach and did an income approach. But I think it's really important to look at what is missing out of Mr. Lenhoff's income approach. And also to look at the extreme amount of depreciation. So the applicant talks about depreciation of this property, functional and economic depreciation of this property. This is a property that is being used for what it was designed for. It is and built for. It is being constantly updated as the residents pass away or move out. I don't know how many actually move out. I don't know those statistics, but these units will be renovated as a new tenant comes in. And in the Monticello building, quite a few of those units have been renovated to combine two units together to make them larger, to give them a larger bathroom. So that kind of work is ongoing. That happens all the time in this property. And that kind of thing, as time goes by and those renovations get made, get rid of that functional obsolescence. Economic obsolescence is very complex in the way it's being presented here. I believe the Lenhoff appraisal says because the costs increased over the last couple of years, therefore, but the income didn't increase the exact same percentage, therefore it's economic depreciation. Well, I just don't agree with that. I mean, economic depreciation, we understand if the cost to build a building went up 15-20% and nobody is building them because of that, there's no demand for that type of building anymore, despite the fact, because of the fact that the cost went up, that would be a reason for economic depreciation. But there is still demand in Albemarle County for commercial buildings. There's still demand for this type of property. There's no reduced demand. There's certainly now, Mr. Buchanan showed you, there's reduced occupancy in this property since before the pandemic. But this is a senior property. We would absolutely understand that occupancy in a multi-family type property would be reduced during and immediately after the pandemic. I'm sure that's not a big surprise to anyone and that situation has happened. Let me get back to my notes, make sure I'm not missing anything here. But we believe that certainly Mr. Lenhoff has grossly overblown the depreciation. Another point that was made was about, our costs, we're calling this property excellent. Well, as I said, excellent quality, but even then, our costs that we're using are $40 or $50 million below both the appraisers' cost new values that or cost new amounts that they included in their appraisals. Now, I should have pointed this out. I gave you some handouts up here in the corner here that includes some of the information that I'll be talking about. And let me make sure I have. So I have this summary of appraisals. And I should have pointed this out first. That's what I'm talking about. So you can see these values here and here. We provided that to the.
I think I have an extra
Do you-
here.
I think,
Is this yours? Or do you-
please. Oh, you all have one? Okay. No, I think actually, is that yours? That's yours. Do you have one, Miss? Hey, I think they might have been offset.
Yeah, that we
It's that one that Mr. Arsali's got right there.
Yes, okay.
So that's the different. Is that the one? I think there were definitely 4 foot over, so that one is Mrs. Pape's. I got.
So
They
we
were
can
just
maybe
off, they were
put
offset.
mayo.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, there you go. So this has all the information that I'm referring to and I just wanted to summarize because there's so much information in these appraisals that were provided that I had to just to organize it for myself, say, well, what is each of these appraisers doing compared to what we're doing? And so I've provided here the different numbers for each approach. So as I said, Mr. Lenhoff did not develop the sales comparison approach. I did not develop the sales comparison approach, and I did not develop the income approach. However, I want it to be very clear because it's been presented that, in this document that was provided in advance, that this is a USPAP violation because I did not consider the income approach. Well, that is absolutely untrue. I did consider the income approach. And even more importantly, we did an income approach in 2016 and before. That work was so bad that when I looked at it, I said, this is not appropriate. And then started looking at what would be appropriate. This is not the first, I first came here in 2000. I actually came in 2015 and took over in 2016. So the 2017 assessment was the first one I was really responsible for. However, there's a Westminster Canterbury very similar of the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia Beach where I came from. So I assessed that property down there. I'm very familiar with it. I'm very familiar with the same issues that relate to it. So my history with Westminster Canterbury doesn't just go back to 2016. So the work that I found we had done before was inappropriate. And because of the complexity of the income, I decided at that time we would not be able to come up with a credible value that was not misleading in any way, which is kind of our mandate as an appraiser, and that the income approach would be inappropriate for our use. So I definitely considered it and I definitely rejected it. So that is not a USPAP violation. That is exactly what we're supposed to be doing. So just to respond to that information that was provided. All right, so before I get back to income though, I wanted to discuss depreciation. So we often hear from appraisers, from fee appraisers certainly, the only appropriate use of the cost approach is for brand new buildings or for special use buildings. Typically it is, not a lot of effort is put into it. And, a lot more into the sales comparison, into the income. But depending on the type of property, the cost approach can be very effective. And we do the cost approach and rely on the cost approach for most of the properties or all of the properties that actually have the type of issue that has the going concern situation, like this property, like nursing homes, assisted livings. So there's a big component of value that's created by the operations that are going on, by the medical services that are provided, and how to properly isolate or identify how much value that is very difficult. And as you can see in both Pelton and Glenhoff appraisals, all the motions they go through to try to do that kind of proves my point as to how difficult that is. So like I said, we develop the cost approach on those types of properties. We also do sales ratio studies on our commercial properties. And we use those sales ratio studies, which in itself is a sales comparison approach for mass appraisal. And we make sure that the cost values that we are using, the cost values that we are coming up with for assessments are appropriate compared to the sales. So we have assessed all of our nursing homes, assisted livings, and this property and others by the cost approach. And then we calibrate that or check that through our sales studies to make sure that the ratios are appropriate. Obviously, there's no sale of Westminster Canterbury. We don't expect there's going to be one anytime soon. This, because of the way it's set up with this nonprofit ownership. So I want to overview our cost approach. So I've provided as part of this packet this one with depreciation, and it has this graphic on the front. So I think it's really important. And even though this is a life cycle chart of a residential property, which this is, Westminster Canterbury is in essence a residential property, but it's a commercially, it's more like multifamily residential with the component. It's not like a single family, and I'm not trying to say it is, but this is a great graphic for explaining how depreciation actually works. Because we talk about, Westminster Canterbury, and if you look at some of the pages after this cover page, we'll be talking about the home for the elderly has either a 50 or 60 year life, depending on its construction type. And, this property is not going to be bulldozed 50 years from now or 60 years from now. So how does that work? We're saying it's a 50 or 60 year life, but it's not going to die in 50 or 60 years. What really happens here? So this graphic shows that there's work being done at different levels through the property's life, and the effect on depreciation every time a major item is done. When the roof that Ms. Buchanan was talking about for $1 million on the Blue Ridge, that's when that gets done, the depreciation drops. So over time, it goes up and down, up and down. However, we don't do an analysis of every single item that's being replaced on a property. We look at the general condition of the property. Is it being maintained? Is it falling apart? Is it pristine because they're doing an excessive amount of work on it? In this case, we're saying it's average condition for the age of each component of it. And when I say component, I mean the different buildings that were built at different times. So when you're thinking of depreciation, really have to keep this in mind, that depreciation does not just end the building in 50 years or 60 years. It's important to understand that it's a kind of continuum of reduction in value. So if you were to look through these, you would see that each parcel, each building within this community, and these are we're referring to the commercial buildings, so the Blue Ridge Ring, the Pantops Ring, the Monticello Wing, the nursing home and the assisted living. Each one of those has a page straight out of Marshall and Swift to show what their life would be, their expected life would be, and then based on their expected life and their actual age, and we're not saying that they're less age than they were actual, what would their depreciation be on a building like this? So we are using Marshall and Swift costs. We're using Marshall and Swift depreciation. It's an appropriate combination. Now, like I said, our Marshall and Swift costs 176 million, I think that number was. Is $40 to $50 million less than what the appraisers are coming up with. They're using more depreciation on top of a higher number. So, I think that's important to understand. So also, as part of that handout, I have provided, that's not it. Here's Westminster Canterbury building permit summary. So this actually has a list of all the building permits that were taken out on the property. But at the top left corner of the cover sheet, it has the total amount of money based on the building permit work amounts that was being spent on the property for this. This is not maintenance. This is typically where they're renovating units or they're, they haven't built any new units. So the last ones that were built were in 2015-16 with the 5 villas or cottages. But you can see the work that's being done in the notes that are on this. So you can see the kind of updating that is being done to these units. Some of these, it should say that they're combining the units together. They're doing other types of tiling and stuff like that. This is your normal updating of a property so that it loses that functional or any extra physical depreciation that it would have had. And it brings it in line with exactly what Marshall and Swift is saying a property does and why that Marshall and Swift depreciation is appropriate. So as I said, we kind of have learned about this property and errors, misunderstandings that we had about this property during the lawsuit. So we learned quite a lot. We learn everything. We learn something every year in this job because we do so many different things. But we certainly learned a lot as by seeing the Lenhoff appraisal initially, and then the Teleton appraisal after that, and exactly how all of the income components of this property come into play. So that's important when it comes to understanding why this value has changed both down and up over the last couple of years. So in 2022, the lawsuit, we had received the Lenhoff appraisal because of the lawsuit. And because of that, honestly, I was being a little conservative. I went down on the assessment. I increased the depreciation. We went down from 134 million to 131 million. We didn't change that based on the market going down. The market wasn't going down from 21 to 22. The market was going, on average, went up 8 or 9% throughout the county. That was really a reaction to the Lenhoff appraisal and, where should we be? It's trying to take into account all the information that we had at that point. However, then We learn more in the next year. We have the Teleton appraisal and all the information that's provided there. And what a wealth of information that was, and knowledge of these types of properties. And we found that, wait a minute, you know, we're doing this part wrong. We need to adjust where we are. Now, all of that previous year stuff, I'm saying that, you know, we were too low. That'll all be determined in the lawsuit, you know, in court. You know, you're just here to decide this year, is this $160 million value appropriate or not? So now I want to talk about income. So this is what I was thinking. Some of this is what I was thinking at the time. I dismissed the income approach. Some of this I've been thinking of since. So I've kind of mixed these items together, but it's all information that we need to consider. So the property received, just based on the occupied units, and this is based on the census that Ms. Buchanan provided to me this year. They received $137.8 million in entrance fees just on the occupied units. So they booked those over time, but upfront, $137 million on those units. How do they get booked? How should they be counted for the income approach? I think that's two different things. They book them based on probably accounting rules. How would an appraiser book them? Because, you know, if they're expected, if the residents are expected on average to live 8 or 9 or 10 years, depending on the information provided by Mr. Buchanan, and I don't know what time period they're booking them over. They book them over 10, 15 years. The appraiser should use that over the time that would be expected for those to be used. I don't know. I don't know the correct answer to that. And I didn't know that then. They do hold a $24 million refund liability on these fees according to that same census. I think that's a little bit higher on their balance sheet that she was talking about. They also receive approximately $2 million a month in fees from these residents, which covers, you know, you can consider that rent, you can consider that long-term care insurance payments to cover healthcare. I'm not denying there's healthcare provided in this property, but how does that get utilized in the income approach? They run the property like it's run by a nonprofit. So, but what happens to the money that is left over when one of the residents passes? According to the Teleton appraisal, and I want to get this number right. It was in his reconciliation page. The turnover entrance fee revenue for 2022 was $10,834,000. So how do you treat that? On top of the revenue that's being booked that year for the upfront fees, and on top of the amount of money you get monthly. Also, he points out there was an estimated imputed entrance on the entrance fees for January 1st of more than $18.5 million. So they're holding on to $75 million, like I said, in cash and investments. That is income to the property. And it's income that needs to be considered when you're figuring out a value of this property by the going concern or by the, you know, whatever you want to call that overall value. That was definitely a number that was not included in the Lenhoff appraisal. He's completely ignoring, it appears, the fact that those assets exist and they can be utilized, and that that money, the turnover entrance fees also exist. So he did not include that at all. He included, you know, he included an income approach that was more similar to an apartment complex than what this property actually does. The book value of the property is $196 million. Now, book value is not assessed value. I mean, it's not a market value, but that's certainly a piece of information. So, you know, why is there a huge difference there? Now, that includes those $74 million, $75 million, whatever the number is of those entrance fees that are being held onto. When the residents are paying these large upfront fees, how does that affect the risk profile of a property? When you determine a cap rate on a property, effectively, cap rate is rock and roll. It's return of capital and return on investment, but it also includes risk, the risk profile on top of that. So you're investing something, you want to get some of your investment back over time. You want to get a return on that investment, and you've got to cover how much risk of you actually getting that money back is. So the cap rate includes all of those components. So how does the fact that they're holding on to $75 million in upfront fees reduce the risk that they have to provide these services to the residents? And it's something that Ms. Buchanan said, they provided 8 million, I think it was around 8 million, but if you adjusted for inflation, it's 20 million, something like that. So compared to the amount of entrance fees that they get and the amount of entrance fees that go past, we don't know, we haven't been provided with. You know, Mr. Telleton talks about in 2022, in 1 year, there were $10 million in entrance fees from turnover. Now, I'm assuming that's entrance fees that were held, that were a previous tenants or residents' entrance fees, that when they pass and they leave the property, however they leave the property, that entrance fee is then held on to. You know, it doesn't go back to the owner unless there's a clause in their contract for a refund. And the refund, you know, we already talked about 24 out of the 137 million is the refund obligation. So the rest of that goes to the property. The income that was provided by Ms. Buchanan, it was her, I want to say it was Exhibit D. Exhibit D includes depreciation, amortization, and interest. Those are not appraisal expenses. So when she says that the cash flow decreased over time, depreciation is not a cash flow. Amortization is not a cash flow. Interest you pay, it would be a cash flow, but it's not an appraisal income or expense item that would be in the income approach. So these items all increased over those times. So what effect would that have if you actually just looked at appraisal related income and expense items? We don't believe that the income actually dropped in this property in any of these years. So like I said, the income approach was not developed in 2017 to 2022. So development of an income approach for 2023 wouldn't necessarily have come up with a lower value, because I'm assuming that if we developed an income approach in 2023, it would be based on the similar information that was developed in 2020, would have been used in 2022. So to say that we would have come up with a lower value in 2023 if we'd done an income approach, I think is wrong-headed. Unfortunately, what the truth of the matter would probably be is we would have come up with a much higher value in 2022. And the change in value for 2023 based on an income approach would have been a little higher based on the change in these numbers. However, that's not really what the assessment was based on. So if you're comparing an income approach for 23, you'd have to compare it to an income approach for 22, not the cost approach that we developed last year based on what we knew last year. So we also, and this was in response, we got this Exhibit C, which changes that Ms. Buchanan went over of the other types of properties. And we put this together, and the only thing I want to show here just before the meeting. And we were just trying to show the previous year changes. So this is the same properties that were included in the applicant's packet. But we just included a column for the 2021 to 2022 changes. And we've, showing here that Westminster Canterbury went down 4% that year, as I've already explained, and why. The Blake went up 16.8% last year. Learn more about that property last year. So, our assessment changes aren't just because of what the market's doing, and also what we're learning about properties over time. And some of these other properties, they were pretty much flat, as opposed to the subject going down 4%. So there's a difference there. But as I've already said, the reason why this property is not going up the same amount as these other properties for 23, as are indicated on this spreadsheet, is because of the change we made. And we made it on purpose, and we made it for a reason. So, and then I have a few comments just in response to some of the information that was provided. Ms. Buchanan was talking about the Jefferson cottages and how, obsolete they are, old they are. However, these residents with means that they have paid on average $410,000 entrance fees to get into these cottages. So the Jefferson cottages we have as a B grade home. So we are definitely not calling these excellent. So I wanted to make sure that that was clear. So, if you were to look at, it's the information that Mr. Downey provided, the new piles of pages there. They have the individual property worksheets for each of the villas, and those are either Bs or B+2s, because the quality of those homes, as we compare to them other homes in Albemarle County, are not very high quality as an A or luxury or anything like that. We're not trying to say they are. We have them, like I said, these Jefferson cottages as B grade, which is really your average home for the county. And we also have and like I said, people pay upfront $410,000 just to live there, plus their fees. They're deciding. So I think it's important also to know, Ms. Buchanan pointed out that these cottages are, they don't have as many people on a waiting list for them, but they're another option. They are an option for people who don't want to leave their single family home and move into basically an apartment building, a large residential structure. They obviously have people who will pay almost $500,000 in order to live in a separate cottage, either a duplex or a single family. It's an option for the property, and certainly I understand that that's a good option for them to have. It gives them flexibility on what they have to offer. She also talked about the Monticello. I wrote cottages here, but it's not cottages. The Monticello building, which is the original building, and the challenges in there. So people are also willing to pay on average $310,000 to get into one of those units. So that's not, a small amount of money. And yes, it is the older ones, but it still has demand, and they still have plenty of those units filled. I already talked about how we have the commercial parts is excellent quality. However, we depreciate them based on their age. And we talked about that in detail. Now, they have chosen to only increase their fees a certain amount. I don't remember the amount, but it was 2-3% or something like that. That is their choice. It is not determined necessarily by the market. And of course, they didn't say that, and they could respond to that. But it is not a restriction to the property. I don't think it's a contractual restriction that they won't go up more than 2 or 3. I don't know if it is or not, but over time, they will increase those fees, those monthly fees, as they need to maintain the property, would be my understanding. But an owner of this property, and you have to remember that we appraise a property not based on the current owner. The current owner isn't really part of the value. The property should be independent of who owns it. So we're talking about a prospective buyer would pay a certain amount of money for it, is what an appraisal is based on. And that, as Telleton points out in his report, he would expect a buyer to be a for-profit investor, probably a REIT, I would guess. And they're going to change these fees as they need to get whatever, to cover whatever expenses they have, to cover whatever profit they need to get. And that will only be determined on, if we raise it too high, people will complain and they'll move out, or they won't move in. And that's what how the market decides those. So the fact that they decided to only increase their fees by 2 or 3%, yet our assessment is going up 22%, which of course is for a totally different reason. I don't think those two are connected in any way. Even if we said the market went up 4% or 5% for this property, then the fact that they raised their rents by 2 or 3% wouldn't be indicative of that change being wrong. So that is totally under their control. And something that was not pointed out was that the nursing home assisted living do have some, I understand, private pay that are not residents. They have some outside people who come in and they pay for services. So there is some extra income that's related to that type of services. Not those facilities, the assisted living and the nursing home are not 100% dedicated to just the residents that are there. They have rooms that or beds that they use for them. So they can comment about that in their response, but that is my understanding. And so we have provided you a lot of information, both of us, both sides. And I believe that our assessment is appropriate. We have an appraisal that is far lower. And we have an appraisal that's higher. And we're in between those. I think that the way we've come up with this value is appropriate, that the depreciation we use in our cost approach is appropriate. And I don't believe that any extra depreciation is necessary in this case. Mr. Lenhoff, when we spoke a year or two ago, talked about functional obsolescence, and his example was, an example that he gave me was that you would typically see, visited a property, one of these types of properties, there was a tennis court. And it looked brand new. So he asked them when he went in, he was talking about the property, and he said, "Did you guys just build that tennis court?" And they said, "No, that's been there for 10 years. And I might be off on the age. Nobody ever plays it." So he said that type of thing is a functional obsolescence because it's not used. They spend this money to build this tennis court, but it's not used. However, in the same conversation, he said that people will not live here unless there's a tennis court. So is there functional obsolescence because nobody plays the on the tennis court? Or is there no functional obsolescence because you have to have the tennis court in order to get the clientele you want in your property? So don't fall for arguments that overstate the effect of depreciation on this property. It is ongoing. It is well maintained. It's a beautiful property. People, it's sought after. It has a wait list for residents to move in. That's all I have for you today. Thank you.
Oh, you take a break. All right, well, I'll take a 5-minute break till 10:50.
You want me to stop the recording?
Please.
Peter, you saying there's
Okay, we're back up.
Thank you. Just proceed when you're ready.
And I do want to say that the tennis court I was talking about was not on this property. This was a conversation about the thing in general, so.
I'm going to ask Ms. Buchanan to speak to what she has heard from Mr. Lynch. I will summarize later. Her opportunity is to speak as fact witness.
So Mr. Lynch covered quite a few topics, quite a few financial topics, and for this board and for Mr. Lynch, I continue to put forward my offer to help explain how our financials work with providing long-term care. We are a long-term life care community. Mr. Lynch cited many elements of our balance sheet, entrance fees, fee schedules, all of this information I shared with Mr. Lynch in helping to increase his understanding of who we are and what we do. Along with any entrance fees, monthly fees, etc., come significant expenses, significant lifetime commitments in providing care and services to residents. We walk through in detail the Life Care Services and Residents Agreement, where we make a contractual commitment to every resident at Delphia CVR. I haven't heard from Mr. Lynch a position which indicates why an income approach should not be used. I have not heard anything other than bringing in facts that I can help further illuminate for you. We have a refund liability. Yes, we have investments. It's to help offset that future liability for the lifetime care of residents. Mr. Lynch failed to mention that we have $58 million of debt issued with the cooperation of the Economic Development Authority of Albemarle County. Mr. Lynch spoke to elements that would be brought into determining business value and did not distill that to the real estate value, which is his duty to determine. Any kind of enterprise value from any of the reports he cited that is north of $200 million is simply extreme. Again, on Exhibit D, I laid out for you net operating income of level amounts at $13 million. It would suggest an EBITDA multiple of 18 times. We demonstrated there's no increase in income in the period Mr. Lynch has assessed. And so I think I'm happy to answer questions for clarification purposes if there is a misunderstanding as to our balance sheet, our income statement. I've been entirely transparent with sharing information, fee schedules, an abundance of information. Entrance fees support life care. Entrance fees are for long-term care. It is not that we just sit on cash, allowing it to grow. We turn around and use entrance fees to support life care services.
Well, if it's acceptable, I would like to give my summation. And of course, we're open to questions. Would you rather ask the questions before I summarize, or?
I will, well, let me see if does anyone on the board have any questions this time?
I have a question or two, but I would like you to summarize if you don't mind.
Very well, I'll try to do that. First, let me thank you for your attention to this case. We appreciate it very much. Now, at the outset, I set out what I believe this case is all about. The 4 points: the removal of functional obsolescence from the residential, the lack of any in the commercial, and the lack of any external obsolescence in the commercial, and no income analysis, no income analysis that would have shown that there was no income growth, nothing to support the idea that the property has gone up in value by 24%, and to say no income analysis was performed is simply to say that the exhibit that showed that the income was level was not looked at, was not considered. I'm not talking about an elaborate income capitalization approach to value. And I'll get to what we do about these appraisals in a minute. I'm just saying that when you look at these together, we find one reason after another to conclude that there's no basis for this increase. And then the last thing is the uniformity. The exhibit that came in at this very last minute about comparing these other properties, I'm floored by the fact that this was handed to me right in the middle of this hearing. I bent over backwards to get everything at least as early as last night. And I did not even follow what you're saying about this. The non sequiturs between look what we did and didn't do between 21 and 22 with all these other properties and how this one did not go up as much as they did. I don't follow it. And in fact, I don't see that it says anything relevant to this case, quite frankly. So just revisiting the uniformity table that Ms. Buchanan developed, I didn't hear anything that met her testimony, that responded to her testimony about how differently Westminster Canterbury is being treated, how arbitrary it appears that their 24% increase can't be justified in comparison to all the others. I didn't hear a thing responsive to that. And that's what's before you in weighing this evidence. But let me go now to, as best I can, a point by point. The lawsuit. Now, I was most conscious of the fact that the lawsuit itself somehow might be of interest to you. And so I did ask whether Mr. Lynch could tell me, does the board know about the lawsuit? I was told you do know about the lawsuit. And so with that in mind, I didn't go into the lawsuit at all, just knowing that you are aware of it. But the point about the lawsuit is this: it is totally separate. It is in a totally different tribunal, and it has no bearing on this specific individual case for this specific individual year, which is strictly within your jurisdiction. It is not part of that lawsuit. And so you are to, I believe your role here is to take this 1 year, as you are jurisdictionally limited to only the current tax year, to look at it within the confines of the issues that are presented in making this assessment for this year. The lawsuit has nothing to do with it. Now, that being the case, how then do we get the lawsuit brought into this, which Mr. Lynch did bring it in a definite way, by saying in a very conclusory manner, in a very vague manner, now this is not an explanation to meet the contentions that we have made. Say, we learned a lot from the lawsuit. We've learned a lot. What does that tell you? It doesn't tell you anything. He didn't tell you what he learned. He didn't tell you, he didn't get into it. All he did was tell you this conclusory statement. Well, the reason we're now doing it this way is we've learned a lot from the lawsuit. That doesn't tell you anything. The lawsuit itself, I'm only going to go into it this far. Yes, it did get to the point of depositions and appraisers and all that type of thing. It certainly did intensify the scrutiny on this particular property. It does not, the statement we've learned a lot from the lawsuit does not tell you Why was 20% functional removed? Why wasn't there any functional or external on the commercial? How is it that you went about this, ignoring the fact that the operational facts of the property don't justify an increase? There's been no answer to that. You don't answer that by saying, we've learned a lot from the lawsuit. And it said nothing about how this arbitrary 24 versus 4 came about. So the lawsuits themselves and the fact that somebody's wiser because of the lawsuits this lawsuit does not give you anything to go by in making your decision in this case. The same is true of his beginning phase of his presentation, when he said that, well, we do a mass appraisal. We have so many properties, and this is beside the point. It begs the question: what are the specific, unique characteristics of this property? The jurisdictional exception, as he alluded to, says you have to do it the way your jurisdiction commands, and each specific property has to be treated separately. And the case law in Virginia is exactly that. It's not an adequate response to say, well, look, we have to do so many of them. That's all that means when an assessor says we have to do a mass appraisal. The question is, what did you not do on this one? And we're not accusing him of a USPAP violation. That happens to be, yes, it is in our appeal that our appraiser, an expert that came out of the lawsuit environment, made reference to USPAP compliance. You didn't hear me say thing one about USPAP compliance in the points that I am making about this appeal. You can lower this assessment without implying in any way that Mr. Lynch has committed a USPAP violation. What he's done is he's committed a kind of error of exclusion and failure to consider certain things and not justify what he's done. These don't necessarily rise to the level of a USPAP violation. Another thing to bear in mind, I'm afraid this has gotten overlooked. As you know, and I don't need to sort of spoon feed this point, there's business value and then there's real estate value. There's business enterprise value and there's real estate value. The business enterprise value is this high rolling picture of the enterprise itself with all this entry fees and all these services provided and all this type of thing. And who would buy this business, which typically would be bought for that more than for the real estate. The business enterprise value is what you get, fees for service and all this type of thing. It has very little to do with the real estate value itself. The reducing real estate, the real estate component out of all that is admittedly difficult, but to begin the defense of this case based on concepts that are strictly related to the business value is very misleading and very obfuscating. And I'm afraid that that is essentially what you heard from Mr. Lynch about, oh, these are people of means. They can pay X amount for entrance fees. These entrance fees, these are all concepts that relate to the business value. They don't get down to the nitty gritty of what has to be explained when the questions that I've raised are before this board. And so the entrance fees, the refunds, all of that, all Mr. Lynch did was raise what I would call a lot of puzzling questions, a lot of interesting questions that almost all of them relate to the business value. And if I can just take you to the limit as far as I think you need to in looking at these appraisals at all, finding out how much is attributable to real estate is basically a problem of looking at the real estate and trying to determine how much rent it would pay. You have an owner-occupied building which is not paying rent, as you would in, say, a shopping center. In order to determine the income stream that's coming, that is attributable to that property, you have to impute rent. All right, so a anchor tenant in a shopping mall who owns the property and is not paying any rent, the way that it's valued is to calculate an imputed rent and then capitalize that. So the amount of rent that it would pay is the nature of the problem. When you have a property that's not actually paying rent, but you have to arrive at its real estate value. And that's what these appraisers basically do. They use a factor, a lease coverage factor, or a HUD map formula to determine out of all this cash flowing around out of the business value, how much rent would this property pay? And try to get to that. So that's what they do when they appraise the property under a full-blown MAI appraisal approach, which is what those two appraisers did. But anything that avoids even talking about that doesn't get you anywhere. So that's what I'm saying. All of this talk about entrance fees and the amounts of gross revenue and all, it's really pretty much beside the point, because it doesn't help you to reduce the question down to the amount of rent that the real estate would pay. That's why this case is not about any of that. This case is about these very limited questions that have to do strictly with the real estate. And so I ask you to not be, brought into such really speculative questions about, well, what about all this money in the business realm? And now down to the appraisals themselves. We do not make our case out based on Mr. Lenhoff's appraisal per se. We included it in the package as information. And so the appraisers are not here. They're not here to be cross-examined. The appraisals themselves will only result in certainty, really, because as you can see from the way the two appraisers went about all this, there's going to be a difference of opinion on an awful lot of things. And to start looking at taking a bit of one of them and a bit out of the other one and trying to make something of it, I'm afraid only gets you to a state of uncertainty that is not suitable to what this proceeding is really all about and what this case is really all about. It's about a technique that was used that cannot be justified and has resulted in an increase that is radical, and it's basically shocking to see this value go up so high when there's nothing in the operations of the facility to justify it. Again, how can you give much weight to a defense of this assessment, which relies on something like a side conversation with our appraiser about a tennis court one day? That's a way of explaining to you is thinking about obsolescence. I submit to you, how can you give any weight to that? It's not an answer. And it's just one more obfuscating element in the so-called defense that's been presented. Here again, when Mr. Lynch went to speak about Monticello, people pay X dollars to get in. And the fees can be increased by 2 to 3%, depending on what the owner wants to do. And yet we increased the assessment by 22% for totally different reason. Totally different reason. What was the reason? The reason was actually never explained. What we are begging to have justified has never been justified in any of these responses that you've heard. So then, I think you know the case. I think you hear me. We differ on what this case is all about. It's not about anything that's coming off of the lawsuit. It's not about these two appraisers, these two appraisals that are going to only lead to more uncertainty. They are not really, they're competent in a sense. They're very hearsay. The appraisers are not here to be cross-examined or explain anything. I don't think you should give them much weight at all. What you should really look at is what I've submitted to you all along. How come you took out all that 20%? Looks like you had some preordained reason to try to justify increasing this assessment by that much, because you came up to roughly the same amount of pounds, and you didn't have any explanation about what about the income that doesn't justify any increase. And how about this arbitrariness in comparison to the other facilities? There's been no real explanation of that either. So in summary, I ask you to grant the relief for the reflection, use this assessment back to the
And now some
Thank you.
questions. Karen, if you want to go ahead and start.
I'd like to ask, just for a little bit of help in understanding your income and expense statement. So you've got the second page. I'm looking at this statement.
Yes.
Looking at your line two, that amortization of the deferred revenue. I just want to make sure I understand a few things. So is that that's a portion of that 73 million that you've committed for that long-term care if there's a shortfall? I mean, you've got that money set aside for those residents, is that correct?
It's not precisely set aside, but what this is reflecting is how we earn revenue over the course of a contract, the lifetime of a contract. We receive entrance fees that are tied to the number of move-ins in a given year.
Right.
It could be as low as 15, it could be as high as 30. So with every unit, there's an entrance fee. Mr. Lynch described entrance fee and monthly fee. Record that and recognize the revenue over the life of the contract. So the actual cash receipts of entrance fees can be much lumpier, up, down, up, down.
Right.
This is more of the, in the end, this is what we've earned over time, and this is what shows essentially how much of that we get to record and essentially know that we keep in terms of entrance fees and earning it, each month, each period.
Because I guess the area where I'm confused is that I see, and just bear with me, if you would, if we look at this page
Yes.
in your document. So where I'm confused, of course, you've excluded that on your first table, you've excluded that line 2 income. So basically you're just including your resident fees and your care area fees. Is that correct? You're doing it on a 6-month basis on this, annual basis on this other sheet. So you're not really including that, which is fine. I just want to make sure I understand.
The point of the cash flow discussion was
Yes.
exactly that, to just distill for Mr. Lynch and his team
Okay,
on a monthly basis, what does our cash picture look like?
right, okay.
And it is slim. We have to have those entrance fees. In other words, we would have a losing margin, a negative margin, without receiving entrance fees. The turnover in independent living units that then is caused because of the community care continuum. If we don't have entrance fees, we have constraints on the ability to cover our expenses. So the purpose of the March 16th meeting and drilling down to, this is actually what our cash picture looks like in the first 6 months. This was our attempt to help Mr. Lynch and his team understand, what exactly is our rent roll. He continued to ask for a rent roll, support, which we provided. We provided the actuarial support for how much we report over time. That was really to show you in terms of a cash picture, month by month basis. We don't have enough cash revenue over expense to break even. It is the entrance fees over time and having an accumulation of reserves that allows us to weather those downturns in entrance fees. This picture is, as I mentioned, it's our full profitability picture. This presents operating income, and I've made the adjustment. And so now on this page, we convert to EBITDA. So an earning before interest depreciations without regard to depreciation or financing cost and excluding contributions and investment income. That we have investments is not a real estate issue, that's a business issue. Were we to be in the theoretical sense for sale, the investments would not be sold. So this is our complete P&L picture. Purpose of that little inset within my discussion of economic challenges was from the March 16th meeting with Mr. Lynch and his team to essentially just distill to what are the cash components of revenue and the cash components of expense with and without interest.
But I guess that leads me to the remainder of my question is that, I do see that your expenses are going up, you said about roughly 10 or 11%. Oh, your operating expense year-to-year growth is 10%. And then of course I look down at your higher care units, like your memory care unit and the CL unit,
Catered living, which
Yes.
is assisted living.
the catered living. And I think the occupancy rates on those have actually increased, which means your expenses are increasing. Is that correct? Because you said you don't make money off those. They're more expensive.
That's correct.
So,
And Mr. Lynch referred to the fact that when we have available capacity in their health center, we serve the broader community with short-term rehabilitative stays after acute care, a hospital stay, hospice stays. When we have available beds, we can use those for outside admissions. We apply for, we submit claims and receive reimbursement for that. But the point being, I factored those revenues into that picture. I have included any third-party reimbursement for Medicare and patient services and
oh, yes.
care area revenue.
Mhm.
I've included that
Okay,
in our cash expenses and our cash receipts for those areas. In 6 months, it's underwater $500,000. We don't make money on our care areas. Care areas are there for care continuum movements. That's the commitment we've made. That's what people are essentially paying an entrance fee and paying a monthly fee for life, is that they know they aren't going to have that nursing home risk. They can come in to an apartment $4,000, $5,000 a month, $6,000 a month, and know that if they move to assisted living, they move to nursing care, they aren't suddenly going to be paying, $12,000 a month, which is the market rate for a nursing home, a per diem rate for nursing home. So apologize for any confusion. The small subset of that table was directly from information shared with Mr. Lynch and his team in March. This I have prepared for today's discussion to give you more of a longitudinal look at exactly how flat our income is, that it did not increase year over year. Any period you look at, there's no growth. We've had no addition. In fact, we've had some contraction of the number of available units because we're doing combinations. So we've continued to have pressure through pandemic, through inflation, with what we do. The fact that we have, this daily need to meet expenses and provide care is what I've attempted to show here with, essentially the longitudinal revenue and expense. So this is EBITDA, and or akin to net operating income that we'd apply multiples or cap rates to, and the small subset in the economic external deficiencies was really drilling down to that conversation we had with Mr. Lynch and his team to essentially say, it may look like we are, awash in cash. This is the reality of our operation.
thank you. Yes, that was very helpful.
Any other questions from the board this time?
Yeah, I do. Mr. Lynch, just to be clear, make sure I'm not missing it. What very specifically information did you learn that caused you to change your approach to from 2020 to 2020?
Specifically, when it comes to the cost approach, and I have this in my notes and I didn't bring it up, because there is so much involved in this, but specifically where the cost approach is concerned, we included a 20%, as Mr. Downey mentioned, 20% reduction on each of the villa units or cottage units. Because we do that in an estate, if you've got 4 or 5 houses, every house past the first, we've talked about unseverability, when it comes to that type of situation, we always included that. So we included it here. We found that that was inappropriate in this setting, in the valuation of this property. So we removed that 20% from those cottages. We also, when it comes to the commercial,
And explain why that was inappropriate.
it's inappropriate because we found, based on the appraisal work that was done, that our value was too low and that it wasn't reflective in the market for this type of property. So that's really the connection. It's not reflective in this type of property for reducing the values. Also, in my deposition with Mr. Downey, we discussed the permits for building those 5 units. And our assessments for those 5 units were 6 years later, they were less than the cost to build those 5 units, the 5 cottages that were added in 2015-16. Our assessment was actually lower than the cost to build it 6 years before. And that was an indication that 20%, another indication that 20% was inappropriate in this setting. So we removed that 20% on the cottages. And then to the commercial buildings, we were adding extra depreciation over Marshall and Swift. And we determined that we didn't need to give it extra depreciation over Marshall and Swift, so we went straight by the Marshall and Swift percentage. That as we detailed on those handouts. And I'm sorry I didn't make that clear because I intended to.
Well, I think my question about that is that, you know, your discussion about the functional obsolescence is related to the non-severability. Their discussion about the functional obsolescence is related to the design issues due to the age.
Right.
And so when I look at your depreciation, you know, if I look at this sheet and I see that your depreciation estimates have, you know, I mean, they decreased significantly. So is that because you've taken out functional obsolescence?
Correct. That
And-
included that.
So then can you address the issues that they brought up about the functional obsolescence? For example, you know, that really narrow walkway between D and E, and then the age of these other cottages that were built in the 90s, I think, the early 90s. You know, have you been in them, and can you speak to the functional issues of those?
My staff have been in these, in the cottages, and I've been in the main building. And we do not believe that there is negative functional problems to these buildings. Yes, they are older buildings and designs, but they are also sought after buildings. And that, you know, we don't believe that any additional functional, I mean, they're still the same as any other building built in that time period, and the depreciation we use is based on that same information. So these weren't built totally differently with some alien design to them. They weren't like if you have a house and you build an addition on it, but it's the flow of that house is unusual and non-functioning. That's where we see functional obsolescence, not in the fact that these are older units. We're depreciating them based on being older, and functional on top of that would be inappropriate.
And then my final question is back to you. When you talk about your 3% increase, I know you're a nonprofit, so is that a market-driven increase, 3% increase based on analysis of your competitors? Or is it a 3% increase in your income based on, you know, budgetary purposes decided by the board? How do you arrive at that 3% increase?
Because we've made a lifetime commitment to residents and they have pursued a strategy for managing risk in their financial profile, we feel it's our duty not to shock them with price fluctuations and the influence of inflation that we experience from year to year. So that's an important pricing strategy. And in the given years for each budget year, as I mentioned, we use our actuary to determine what should the fee increases be. And we have not passed on those internal inflation amounts to residents, having the view that this higher inflationary environment will ebb, and we're seeing that come. We do consider our competition. We do consider the market. We're here to provide care for elders and seniors, and fee increases are noteworthy for them when considering where do I go for life care. And so within our regional competitors, we do consider what are market increases and staying within line for what others are charging for increases in entrance fees and monthly fees. It's very important for our 450 residents that they have increases that they can plan for and not be immediately shocked with inflation increases from year to year of 6, 8, 10%. And so it is a strategic pricing in terms of having that long-term commitment to them and honoring their long-term commitment to us.
Any other questions from the board?
One more question. Mr. Downey.
Sure.
You had mentioned and made the distinction between business value and real estate.
Yes.
Would one say, just theoretically, that because you guys have created such business value, that there's an offset of the functional obsolescence because we got a waiting list. People don't care if it's a little older, quote unquote, and they still want to get in there and they're still willing to pay these fees because of the business value that you guys have created.
That certainly has some merit. But I say to that, if the income from operations is not going up, business value is not going up, how do you justify such a radical increase in the real estate value? See, yes, that would be taken into consideration in deciding whether to assign functional obsolescence or not. The facts of the income stream as it exists, there's no indication that the functional obsolescence that was there should be removed because there's nothing indicating an upswing in value. That's my answer.
Any other questions? I have two quick ones. Mr. Lynch, as to the assessments of the villas. So just want to make sure to confirm. So if those villas were taken out of this, and they're sitting on a separate lot or whatever else, in terms of structural value, because you're looking at you're using the cost approach. If it was in a neighborhood or whatever else in that same area, the value would be the same. So you're just using B and then, or are you making any distinctions there?
So we are making a distinction because if you were to take one of these homes and say that it was on a separate lot in a neighborhood, it would then be adjusted based on that neighborhood. That neighborhood might have 110% adjustment for the neighborhood. It would also have a specific lot value, which would be a lot higher for, in Albemarle County, for $100,000, $150,000 lot to put that house on, as opposed to its contribution or its portion of the land value that's included in this property.
But just the structural value. So right now, what if we're looking at all the other appeals we've looked at, and
Right.
let's say one of these townhomes was on let's disregard the lot value. And I understand because every neighborhood we have those adjustments. So that's the same value are you using the same value for those townhomes?
Yes, except for the multiplier.
Except the multiplier. Okay, but you just, this is gonna be a 1 pretty much, because you're not doing so it's not lower, it's not higher, it's just, okay, this one.
And in this case, we're trying to use that, we're using that value really to represent the cost as part of the cost approach, as opposed to what we would do as that single family home as really a market mass appraisal sales study approach.
Okay. And then to the applicant. So in terms of I'm having difficulty with the income argument, and obviously the assessor has said, okay, they've applied, well, but they looked at it, but they said that wouldn't be appropriate. You all have suggested, well, that was not appropriate. They should have looked at income, but the income we're getting, we review many of these appeals, and there are commercial properties, but the only times where really the income approach can be used and it's uniform are in the multi-family context, in the hotel context, in the commercial context, where you're suggesting there's business value associated with these, and these numbers are some combination. How are we, or how is the assessor supposed to separate that and come up with a real estate value based on the 13 million? We don't have a cap rate, we don't have anything else. So are you still suggesting that we should use the income approach to this? And how will we go about doing that if that's your suggestion?
I understand your question because I think it is a very good question. One that troubles us quite seriously, because for me to say you should have done an income approach is me saying to the assessor, you should have done what David Lenhoff did, or you should have done what James Telleton did. You should have worked up the business value based on the revenue streams and all of that. And you should have performed a lease ratio study and a HUD map study to get you to the correct deductions out of business value to determine how much rent the real estate would have paid. All right, that is what the appraisers did. And it is a serious, I don't call it act. It's a serious act to say to the assessor, you should have done all that, because I know how these, and so do you. You know that there are certain kind of outlier case situations where an assessor would probably say, you know what, it's outside my wheelhouse. I'd have to get outside consultants to help me do that. And I'm just not equipped to do it. So I can't be faulted for not doing it any more than I can be faulted for not doing a sales approach when the sales are all over the United States and I can't possibly gather them together. That kind of answer I sympathize with. However, it also reminds me of that hotels, if you've ever seen a hotel valuation, it's very similar to this. You have the business enterprise of the hotel operation. You don't have rent being paid. You have a revenue stream that gets deducted from with the personal property taken out, the income to the enterprise reduced by set percentages. And there's a formula that's sometimes called the Rubin formula that is used. It didn't used to be used all that much, but it has become very standard in assessors' offices to assess hotels by a method that's very similar to the kind of income approach that would be done for this property. All right. So it is not too much to ask to integrate those steps in a standard assessor's office methodology. And if you look at either Lenhoff or Telleton, you will find that the formula and the approach is actually not that complicated. What Mr. Lenhoff did is he said, I have to determine how much rent this would pay. But what that means is, let's say you've got a business like this that doesn't own the property. It rents it. It has to pay rent to somebody. And that rent is going to be the best guide to how much the real estate is actually worth. The market will show you that a person operating one of these is only going to pay a certain percentage of his revenue for rent. Because if they have to pay more than that, they're overpaying and it's impinging upon their net operating income to the business. All right. So the tables that have been developed will show you that if you have X number of business enterprise value and business enterprise net income, the amount of that is going to go for rent in the hypothetical formula is stated as a lease ratio. In Lenhoff's case, it was a 1.5 lease ratio. It is not that difficult. The same is true for the MAP formula that you'll see Lenhoff and Telleton use. Let's say the enterprise brings in $100,000. Well, the MAP formula deducts a straight 25% of that to remove from the enterprise that amount that has to be taken away when we're trying to determine how much of that total revenue would be paid as rent. So it is not that difficult. It may be a case of first impression, but that's not to say that it cannot be done. And but we deliberately have pulled back from that ultimately in that case, because what we are saying is no income analysis was performed. The income was not really taken into consideration, because if it had been, it would have shown that there's nothing increasing by 24% for this property. So I'm not necessarily holding Mr. Lynch's office at fault for not doing an income approach. I do say that, I do mean it, but you don't really need to reach that to include in your reasoning the disregard of income analysis as part of the reason that this result he's gotten is not supportable. You see what I'm saying? It's not necessarily the failure to perform a full-blown income capitalization approach that removes the real estate value. It's nice to have the appraisers lend a hand and show you what they would say about it. It'd be nice if his office would develop that. It's not necessary to achieve the correct result in this case to go quite that far in terms of deciding what is wrong with this assessment.
Any,
Does that answer your question?
it does and it doesn't, and it's the issue, well, I understand your argument. I don't necessarily buy every part of it, but I understand your argument. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm not judging the appeal or the application, but I'm just talking about in terms of the income, because you also mentioned that kind of, well, and this is also not going into going into the weeds of those two appraisals, but you're saying, okay, there are two arguments. We don't have either appraiser here, and when we're gonna go into the income approach there. So I fall back to, in this situation, looking at the cost approach as appropriate. It is an appropriate method to do it, and I feel like the income approach, and I'm speaking for myself, not the board, obviously. And so, as we discussed this, and I know there's been and I know adding 24% to the value is frustrating. I mean, I can hear that. But that's not necessarily what we have to just look at is 160. We're not looking at what last year was the value, if that was appropriate or not. We're looking at 160 million. Is 160 million appropriate this year? So whether or not it was increased or decreased, I'm not sure if that's necessarily our mandate. It's more, is 160 million appropriate? And you all have presented quite a bit to argue that it isn't. And the assessors presented what they have to what it is. But anyways, to answer your question, that's where the income approach, that's where I'm finding difficulty with those arguments. We've spent a decent amount of time with that, but it's difficult to go there because we can't, for our purposes, to separate the business value from the income and then going into how these are done. It's unlike the other income approaches we're using in other cases. But sorry, that's
If I could
Yeah.
piggyback on that a little
Yeah.
bit. So is it safe to assume that, what I'm looking at is that we're looking at basically, a 3 to 4% increase in net operating income or, EBITDA year over year. Okay, so if we're looking at that, then, from a growth standpoint, we have to consider that. But then my other question would be, is it safe to assume, since you have your expenses that are not really attributable to the real estate embedded in this expense statement, you also have income not really attributable to the real estate. So you have that income, those income and expenses that are not attributable to the real estate that are on this income and expense statement. They should balance one another out, roughly, would you say? Because in going back and looking at this, you're saying that you really don't have much of a margin on this. Is that correct?
The income, make sure I understand your question.
Maybe I don't understand the question. No, I do. So my question is that, we've got the income side, we've got the expense side. On the income side, we have, tenants that are paying $8,000 to $10,000 a month, not only for the real estate, but for other services. On the expense side, we have expenses that are also related to that, food, dining, etc.
Yes.
Is it safe to assume that those, if we were to take those, would they be equal to each other on the income and expense side? Is there a profitability, is there profit in those that we're seeing in here that we might mistakenly attribute to the real estate?
There's not profit, but there is earnings that help support and counterbalance the liabilities that we face. So on the resident service revenue and resident service expense, that is the no to low to negative margin that we experience. That's the reality of our business. If you're referring to investment earnings, again, that's that's dividend and interest income on reserves that essentially helps counterbalance our significant liabilities. Service obligation is $70 million. Our refund obligation on a significant portion of our contracts is $30 million. We have $58 million of debt. So all of those significant liabilities quickly swamp $74 million investments. So the income on our P and L that would be not attributable to real estate is investment earnings. Investment earnings is essentially there to grow and provide the counterweight for all of these obligations and future liabilities should we have a financial crisis or, anything else that would be a shock to the organization. We have to be around and for the lifetime of our residents. So the income elements that are not attributable to real estate is essentially investment income. And I would, that's the difference. Everything that is a cash revenue item, that is a resident service revenue item, is overcome by resident services expense. And all of our residential services occur on the campus, on the property. And so we use real estate to provide care. We use real estate to provide that setting for continuing care retirement community. It's identified in IRS code, we are a nonprofit, we can go down the qualifications for care and services to the elderly, et cetera. So it's the venue we use for providing the service and care, which is our contractual obligation to do so. Met with Mr. Lynch in March. We brought our 20-page contract, walked through all of the things, all of the obligations we have that we are contractually obligated to provide. That's, and I continue to say, we will share financial information. We're completely transparent. We want this to be a process that works for both of us. As the most valuable taxable property in the county, we do think that we earn a little bit more attention to how our property is valued, and continue to be willing to share and provide information that helps explain the financial risks we take on and the service we provide.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Brooker asked me a note about something I think is pretty important. Would you allow him to address more very briefly on the matter?
You testified, you,
I'll
swore in.
5 minutes.
but you swore,
Oh,
you
yeah.
swear, you had sworn in earlier, you did not. Okay.
Everything I say will be true.
Let me go through the spiel and make sure, so we can.
Mr. Solly, before you get to that, can I respond to your question to Mr. Downey and his response? Can I?
Yeah, that's fine, go ahead.
Okay.
Sure.
So he mentioned, it's a very simple, use a lease coverage ratio, debt service coverage ratio, whatever you want to call it. The math of these things can typically be pretty simple. The determination of that number is far from simple. Mr. Lindhoff uses 1.5. Mr. Telleton uses 1 3/4. It's based on the mortgage constant position and the debt the mortgage constant from a assumed, assumption of mortgage at 75%, which is far in excess of the 53 million they own. While Mr. Lindhoff's is totally different, and it's determined in a cap rate at 1.5. So, I mean, it is far from simple, even though the math might be. So I just want to make that comment.
All right, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony with oral and documentary which you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? Please proceed.
We have a 5-year strategic plan at WCBR. We finished the second year of that. That 5-year plan, this is just an example of functional obsolescence. That 5-year plan calls for the replacement of the entire healthcare buildings at a cost of, we think, something probably close to $100 million. So, you can say at this point, in 2 years, it's going to have no value if we follow the strategic plan and replace it. Now, we may or may not be able to do that within the 5-year period of the plan based on our financial conditions.
Is that because of functional obsolescence?
It's functionally obsolete.
So the argument, part of the argument you all are making, I just want to make this clear, is, and this is, I mean, you do say the updated, is depreciation. You believe that depreciation on all well, you're adding the 20% functional obsolescence on the residential, but on the commercial structures, you are arguing that the depreciation applied by the assessor's office is insufficient, and either it needs to be increased. Because appreciate, but I mean, I guess again, you're doing functional external obsolescence here. Yeah, okay.
Or external.
Appreciate that. Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, I'm wondering, do you know how much your property taxes are gonna go up under the new assessment? And how that's gonna affect your business and CBR residents, if at all?
$246,000, this tax bill, for the 23 assessment as it is, presented is $1.3 million. $1,367,000, $851, that's $246,000 increase. We pay more in property taxes than all of the other assisted living and memory care facilities listed on my comparable sheet. How will that impact residents? We do not pass along dollar for dollar expense increases. As I've noted before, we've had inflationary increases, wage increases for our $20 million payroll, and bringing our associates to a $15 minimum. And so we will need to find ways to cover the deficit created by this margin, this unfavorable impact. We don't jolt our residents with dollar for dollar increases. So it's going to be perhaps through some expansion efforts, and in other words, growth will help solve some of that if we're able to do that. But prospect of growth becomes challenged when we're facing such a significant tax burden. So won't pass the increases on dollar for dollar. We'll have to find other operational savings. We'll have to curtail capital plans. We'll have to cut back in other areas, which in the long run defeat our purpose. That's the job of financial operational management, that we'll have to find a way to bridge the gap. The answer to your question is it's nearly $250,000 increase in 1 year. We pay nearly $1.4 million in property taxes as a nonprofit operator.
Yeah. May I add a couple of comments? Sure. Okay. So first of all, the Board of Supervisors decided years ago that this property should not be tax exempt, so it should not be tax exempt. And just in response to the replacement of I'm assuming it's the nursing and assisted living wings, the medical sections at $100 million, we assessed those at $15 million currently. And the fact that it would cost $100 million to replace it, we're saying a cost new of only less than 20 million, might be an indication that our cost is a little too low. Now, of course, some of that cost is going to be, moving things around and stuff like that. But I think that's important to note that our valuation compared to what it would cost to replace this property, as just indicated, is not excessive.
First, I need factual correction. You said, I said between 50 and 100.
Okay, between,
Second,
all right,
second, we would not replace it with exactly what is there now. What is there now is functionally, we think, is becoming functionally obsolete.
that's my
I
point.
think we understand. Okay, anything further from the board? Okay, seeing none, we'll close that part.
No, I don't understand that. I'm sorry. So we're talking about the main building, is that correct?
We're talking about the nursing and assisted living.
The healthcare.
Healthcare,
Facilities.
yeah.
Memory care,
So,
nursing facility.
so we're talking about the third and fourth on the list called assisted living wing and nursing wing,
Okay, I see.
which the
And
assessment.
how much, the assisted living wing is not,
E is assisted living.
right, it's
C
not
and D.
included in the replacement.
Oh, so which
In the
one are you,
strategic plan.
which one?
It is included.
I'm sorry, this is all new
It is.
information, so I just want to
I
make
just
sure.
want to make sure I want to understand exactly what buildings those are.
And C, D, and E. Current is our current care continuum. C, D, and E, we described earlier, all have functional deficiencies challenged. We're on, and because some of these facilities are 30 years old. As you can imagine, a 30-year-old home, a 30-year-old nursing home requires updating. And trying to fulfill our strategic plan in the face of significant hurdles and challenges.
So is C, D, and E being replaced?
These, and on this page, which are those buildings?
Labeled as assisted living and nursing. Portion of community.
Would it be the Blue Ridge Main Wing?
Blue Ridge's Apartments, that's A.
Yeah.
Not be that.
No, it's the assisted living and the nursing, exactly on that page.
Okay,
Toward the
in a
bottom.
portion of the main, she said. Okay, okay, great, thank you. All right, thank you.
Anything further? Okay, so with that said, let's see what time it is. It is 11:55. Does anyone want to take a break? We have a few housekeeping matters to do. We can thank you all at this point and just say thank you all for coming out, and we're going to deliberate, make a decision, and set a decision in the next 2 weeks. We're gonna deal with a couple of housekeeping matters with, and then we will deliberate. I don't know if you all want to stay, it will be recorded, so you can watch it later. So just a matter of, and I don't know if we're gonna take a lunch break or not. That's gonna be between us to make that determination. So I don't know if you wanna have the court reporter still here, or you wanna, but like I said, everything is recorded. So it's up to you all.
You gonna decide today?
We will try. This is our last, I think our last scheduled meeting, so I think the idea would be to try to deliberate and make that decision today, because I think we'd have a problem if we otherwise try to post. I don't think we have time to, because we have to get these decisions done before the end of the month, and we'd have to, yeah, I think we do need to make the decision today.
Well, I would want the court reporter to record the deliberations and the decision.
Okay, that's fine. Like I said, does anybody want to break right now? You want to go on to the house? Okay, like I said, we will deal with some housekeeping matters. I don't know what we're gonna do for lunch. We'll discuss that, but and you all are welcome to stay if you like. Just know that that's the rest of what we're planning on doing, so. Okay, so in terms of housekeeping matters, we have two things. I think we should go ahead and get those done real quick. Thank you all for your time and
Thank you so
presentation. It
much.
was very well presented.
It's a nice meeting.
Is Evan still up? Or?
He is.
Okay.
Yep,
Evan,
so
have you a minute?
Directly related right now to this, so I can take a rest break.
We'll wait. We can wait for you when we do start that deliberation.
Mr. Mayo, did you get the minutes? I didn't know if you responded to that.
I'm sorry, he cut out there. I didn't realize that was directed to me. Did I receive the minutes from which meeting?
For August 1st, have you had a chance to look at them?
Yes, I did. I think I looked at those in person when I came in to sign the
Okay.
Correct.
letters, and everything was in line. I asked for one change where I had put that Karen had recused herself from one event, and anyhow, I understand the change was made, and I approve the minutes in the form that they were presented.
Thanks, Evan. Do we have a motion to approve the August 1st minutes?
Would we approve the August 1st minutes?
Do we have a second?
A second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, and then the other housekeeping matter was the form for next year. It's not there. Has everyone had a chance to review the proposed form? Do you want us to actually approve it? You want us to approve it, right?
If you would,
Okay,
it's really for awareness, but if you approve it, it'll become official.
And then you put it in bold. Did you have that before?
I think I bolded something that might not have been folded before.
I think you try to clarify the response parts. So.
Part of the clarification is about the due date.
Right.
That's the most important update. So that's the part I bolded, correct?
Okay, all right.
And just so you know, we are coordinating better what's said on this form, on this application, on the back of the notice when we send it in January, and on the response to the review that we send. So that all three are aligned. Similar wording. So there's no, we were saying the same thing before, but we said it in three different ways. So now we're just lining that up.
Okay, perfect. Do we have a motion to approve the new form?
I move we accept the new one.
Do we have a second?
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Let's make sure we actually, I was just thinking, let's make sure we document that. Did anybody document who did those motions?
Oh. Okay, we made the motion. Who seconded?
For,
I second it.
and then how about for the last 1, 2? So there's the other matters, so the form,
Minutes?
the minutes for that, yeah. Bob, I think Bob.
Yeah, I made the motion.
And then, all right. So, do you all want to go through the deliberation now?
I'd like to take a 2-minute break.
Let's make it 5 minutes then.
Okay.
5-minute break.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
All right.
Let's go for 5.
Thank you, Karen.
We're taking a break, Mr. Mayo.
Yep, that sounds good to me too.
Okay, so back to our case, that was application number 54. All right, who wants to start? Karen? I'll just make this point, and I've made it during the hearing. I find the income approach for our purposes nearly impossible to do, based on the information we have in front of us. And is not. I will go straight in. I think the cost approach is appropriate and is the one we will look at. I think there is a question of depreciation and the obsolescence and whether or not what we should apply, and whether what the assessor applied was appropriate. That's how I would start. I don't know if anybody else wants to go through the income approach at all, but based on the information we have, I just feel like there's not much we can do with that. We don't have a cap rate. We just don't have sufficient information. Other than, and I understand the applicant's argument was just that the income didn't change, so that there shouldn't be an increase, but beyond that, I don't think we can apply the income.
So I agree with you, Anthony. I think the use of the anchoring last year's assessment as an anchoring piece of that argument doesn't work, because as you said, like, the mandate is to adjust based on the market conditions today. We've heard a number of Board of Equalization applicants argue that the property didn't become more valuable from December 31 to January 1 over last year's assessment. And I don't think we're permitted to use that line of thinking. And it seems to me the income approach argument would be that's the bedrock for it. So I agree. I think the scope of the review, in my opinion, should be limited to whether the inputs and the cost approach were appropriate.
Thanks, Evan.
Well, I think that there is some, I think that the income approach that was provided to us, I don't think that we can develop an income approach, and I am certainly, empathetic to the very, very difficult position that Peter is in with Mr. Lynch is in with regard to developing an income approach. But I do think that there are a couple of things that bear to the weight of the assessment, increasing the assessment by 24%, when you only have an increase in the, net operating income of 3 to 5%, and you have downward pressure, because of rising expenses due to an aging population and more people in memory care, in the CL category, then I do think that it's worth looking at. I don't think that developing an income approach is appropriate, but I do think it lends credence to their argument.
My only concern, I think Evan is, this is my concern with that is us looking at that 24, and this is something we've done. This is the same arguments come before us multiple times this year because there was a significant increase. I don't think we really look at last year's value, and what we need to look at is this year's value and what the assessors proposed and whether that's appropriate. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that it is, but I'm just, I think that's how we've been considering all these cases. And I feel like that's how we should consider this one. I understand there's a big jump, but there was also a reduction last year where a lot of these things were not reduced last year. And so it's just a matter of, I think we disregard that. That's an litigation, that's an argument, whatever else, that's not for us. For us, we have 2023, that's the value we need to get. So that's my thought process with this. I don't know if you want to go further with the incomes. And like I said, then it's a question of just, has everything been applied appropriately? And then we can go through the buildings or however else. But anybody else? Joaquin or Bob, you have any other additional thoughts on that?
Well, I thought it was interesting that the nursing facilities are going to be replaced sometime in the next 5 years. So maybe depreciation should be adjusted in those areas of the building.
And I think we can go through maybe those are with the applicant's arguments, the arguments applicant made with respect to functional obsolescence as to these structures. If we want to go just one by one and look at the depreciation percentages, we may want to just do that. That's everyone good with that?
That's where I am, just
Yeah.
making sure we can land on what we think would be the appropriate depreciation number.
Okay. Should we start with the residences? Or do you want to start with the commercial? Anybody have I think you want me to unilaterally choose. Maybe let's start with commercial because we just talked about the nursing, assisted living and.
It's laid out nicely.
Okay. I would suggest let's skip main, assisted living and nursing. Let's start with the other ones that are that issue. Actually, let's look at the functional, if anyone wants to jump in and start talking.
Anthony, I'm working from electronic files and shuffling around here as you guys are shuffling papers. Where are you directing our attention, please?
So one thing Karen has in front of her, and I have in front of me, and I don't know if everything. This one of them is the commercial comparison, is the Westminster Canterbury of the Blue Ridge commercial comparison, which provides the depreciation numbers for each of the buildings.
Okay,
And
got it.
we may want to look at the actual property cards, but so you have, and then the other thing I'm looking at is from the applicant's packet, Exhibit B, which has like lists out the age of each of the buildings and the challenges to each.
Okay, thanks. I'm oriented now.
If you don't mind bringing up the property cards, like the property information that you have.
I have the summary page, so it shows the cost of each building and the depreciation of each building.
This one.
That's what I have up. Is that? Is that what you're asking?
I
for?
may ask you if you don't mind on your system, just, this might be enough for now.
It'll be easier to look at this than it would be
To go through
the
individual.
themselves,
Yeah.
if that's what you mean.
That's what I'm thinking about, but I guess let's go through these. So the blue,
Okay, go ahead.
okay, I have this.
Alright.
So Evan, I don't see you, but the other document we're looking at is, this is from the assessor. It's it has a itemized, it has all the property card numbers, and it's a summary with the addresses, square footage, improvement values, etc.
Okay, yes, I have that.
Okay, so working with all these documents.
Which
So,
building? Yeah, go ahead.
Go on.
I was asking, which building are we starting with here?
Let's start with Blue Ridge, main wing, yes. Well, there's combined, so. You have here breakdown is 5, 1, 2, 3, 5, but this one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So Blue Ridge is, on this one, Blue Ridge is separated. There's 3 separate ones, and then Blue Ridge is.
So the reason it's separated on that is because it was 2 separate buildings in 22, and it's 1 building in 23, so they were showing it as separate.
Blue Ridge, got it, okay.
So it's only 1 building in this year's analysis.
Okay, so Blue Ridge, we built 2003. There is a 9% depreciation on that one. 03.
It's 20 years old
So we
at
don't-
9% depreciation. So I'm looking at your depreciation table. Section 97, page 10 that you provided us, looking at a, 60-year total economic life.
Correct.
So
only
might be
9.
more of a 30% depreciation.
Were there any permits pulled on this one recently?
Oh, we're talking about the Blue Ridge range.
Blue Ridge,
Yeah.
right?
I don't know out of this list of building permits, which ones are specifically in that.
Well, would the building permits be listed on your tax card? I don't think they are.
No,
Is there
it would only
some-
be on the property.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be on the specific buildings.
Where's that 9% coming from? It seems just very low.
From Marshall and Swift, it's what Ms. Pate was pointing out.
Well, you have a 60-year total economic life. You're looking, if you look at this, that was in your packet from Mr. Lynch. Yeah,
This one.
you go
Yeah,
back.
correct. It's about the 4th or
Page.
5th page.
Yeah, look at section 97, page 10, building 52.
Yeah.
Blue Ridge
Um,
Wing.
Evan, we're looking at the packet title depreciation from the assessor on page 4.
Got it. Okay,
Right there. 60-year.
Yeah, so we've got a 20-year life. I mean, I don't know what the economic life is. So you know, if you've got a 20-year life, didn't you say it was built in?
Right, on the next page,
Huh.
it has 60-year life and a 60-year economic life.
Okay,
As in-
20-year age
Effective
is 9%.
9% depreciation. Okay,
And that lines up for each one of these buildings
Does.
on these separate pages
okay.
based on their age.
So then we have to decide, is this a building that has functional obsolescence? It don't think this is one of the ones that they've referred to.
Well, we have so some floor plans require opening and enlarging of small dated kitchens, original roof gutters, soffits are in need of replacement.
Yeah, so I just want to draw attention to the top of the fourth page there, where it says life expectancy guidelines. I think that may give us a clue as to what types of factors or evidence should cause us to deviate from the method, the sort of battleship method that Peter's people used. It says these life expectancy studies do not include cases of mortality from excessive economic or environmental changes, shortened specialty product use, poor business management, natural disasters, et cetera. So, some of the things that were cited by the applicant, things like the windows are a little too small. I wouldn't tend to give much credence to those. I think it's a really nice facility, and probably the windows compare favorably to other facilities in that class. But if there are things that are truly, outside the lines that this life expectancy guideline could not have anticipated, I would be inclined to make an adjustment based on those. But in general, I think the systematic approach that Peter's team used here would make sense to me. And just to try and narrow the scope of what we're attempting here, it might be helpful to think about the categories of sort of deviations from this, or what was the justification to deviate from the standards here.
Anybody have any thoughts on Blue Ridge and whether or not there should be anything added to that?
Well, I still don't understand why you have such, your depreciation estimates have gone down so significantly between the 2 years. You had $11 million in depreciation in 2022 and $7 million in depreciation in 2023. So, I mean, you have said that you were in the building, but, that's significant. That's $5 million. So I'd like to have a little more information about that.
Yeah, so as I explained, I increased the depreciation in 22 in light of the lawsuit, not because of anything I saw in the front. Right or wrong, that's what I did.
Okay.
So I don't believe the depreciation I used in 22 is correct.
Okay.
So I don't believe the difference between the two is really an issue.
I think on Blue Ridge, should we add any additional, anything else on Blue Ridge? Anyone?
I just want to ask you, is this your economic age life? Is that all inclusive, or is this just is that 9% just physical depreciation? Because, if you think about a more standard way of doing it would be your effective age, or, well, I don't want to get into the appraisal aspect of it because I can't, but a 9% depreciation looks like it would just be for physical. Is this just the physical table? Or is
No,
this your-
I don't believe it's just physical. I think, there were extensive studies done by Marshall and Swift that properties of these ages, so that properties, you would expect a 20-year-old home for the elderly
Right.
to have the exact same issues, unless specific work had been done on any specific one. And so the studies that they do indicate that this is the amount of depreciation you would find on a normal home for the elderly.
Anybody, I mean, anybody want to add? Anyone believe? Yeah. So right now we have a 9% depreciation. Should there be any additional depreciation on Blue Ridge?
Who, I guess, who wants to make the case that the items cited on Blue Ridge fall outside the purview of the table? Which of those things is an externality that would not have been anticipated in arriving at the 9% depreciation?
I mean, I don't think either one does. Karen, do you have any thoughts whether or not that's the appropriate view of it, or?
Well, yeah, I guess my only major concern with this one, if we're using this table and it's well supported by Marshall and Swift, then we also, have we dealt with this issue of the gutters, roof gutter soffits, the $2 million cost for, replacement of those items. They haven't been done yet, right? Am I looking at the wrong thing? It says original roof gutter
Right.
soffits in need of replacements, $2 million. Wouldn't that be added to our 9%? That would be an additional, a short-lived physical depreciation that would be over and above typical 9%
Are you
depreciation.
talking about this chart?
Talking about what she's got here, saying that her.
Oh.
The fact that the
Yeah,
roof,
so it would be included in the normal property that's 20 years old. You would expect not to have replaced a roof in 20 years on a property like this.
Yeah, but I think they're saying that it needs to be done. I mean, it is in need of being done right now, so I think that's more of a short-lived.
I don't think they've shown anything that shows that it needs to be done right now. I think it's on their plan and they have to be ready for it.
Well, what do you think about that?
I don't know. It just. The one thing is, as was mentioned, was that the numbers for the cost numbers seem to be lower than what was suggested by the two appraisers. So that is going through my mind, that idea, but at the same time, like I said, with 9% and then, yeah, having a $2 million cost on, $2 million relative is not as big, but it's still, it's still a chunk of money. Right now, the valuation, Blue Ridge is valued at 63 million. The cost value new on Blue Ridge seems low too, 69.4 on a 121 unit building seems low.
Yeah, I guess I go back to the burden of proof on that too. Is the statement in the table that they need to be replaced sufficient to overcome the presumption of correctness by the assessor's office? I guess the other thing I'd point out is, to the extent that's a calculation, what it would cost, $2 million. The roof is a component of the overall building, and if the roof only was depreciated a little further than everything else, if it let's say, for example, that the Blue Ridge weather system tended to age roofs more quickly, that would still be a relatively small effect on the overall depreciation schedule of the building, right? Which covers all the other components. So if we do decide to make an adjustment there, to be aware, like the effect is probably going to be small because the roof is only one of the many systems being depreciated simultaneously with the others.
Anybody else have any? I think Evan is suggesting, if don't get me wrong, but that this is not, doesn't meet the burden for this specific building. So that those components are not going to be sufficient for obsolescence as to those. Anybody want to argue otherwise, or should we move on? Next building. A lot of buildings. Okay. Next one is let's see, hand top swing. Let's do that one, because again, that's one that's limited. Blue Ridge. Hand tops. Pantop's newer, that's 2014. That's all plus the Monticello building directly resulted. I don't see anything on Pantops. So again, this is the 9%, or no, this one's 3% depreciation. Built in the assessor has a 2013. But again, if we're going based on the same thing Evan mentioned, I'm assuming the 3% is on here as well.
It's the last two pages.
Anybody have any further comments or same thoughts on this one as the Ridge?
At the
It's
risk
like
of,
it's commonly used in this type of property. In- you know,
Yes, sir. This is the Marshall and Swift cost. These are the depreciation pages, and then we also get the cost from the cost pages. And that is the standard for appraisers throughout the country.
So anything else on Pantops?
so on that one, I would just note that the applicant in challenges really didn't list a challenge or anything that could be construed as an externality not contemplated by the Marshall and Swift analysis. It just says that they built this one because the other one was obsolete or becoming obsolete. So I don't think but don't think they carried the burden on that one either.
Okay, so the next, our next three buildings are gonna be a little bit more, I think are gonna be a little more difficult. So we have Maine assisted living and nursing. I guess let's deal with assisted living and nursing, because Maine is the one that's kind of a hybrid. So assisted living was built in 2000. And has a 12% depreciation. And this is the one we have testimony Thursday, plan to replace it within the next 5 years. For the strategic plan, and then let's see where was the nursing. Here. That's the catered living that I'm assuming, right? This, because we have, these are the two different names for it, but I'm saying they were built in 2000. Catered living, assisted living, I'm assuming here.
Yeah.
They're the same. Okay. 45 units, challenges, small rooms, low, no combination options, 3 small dining rooms, operationally feasible. This is what difficult connected to the main building, challenging with supported dining, need secondary kitchen. I'm inclined to put some kind of obsolescence on this one. Any thoughts on how much and what would be appropriate? The 60 years.
Well, if you're
12%.
looking at a building that's planned to be, demolished within the next 5 years, then its effective age is gonna be closer to, 50, 55 years. It's got a total 60-year life and has a 5-year remaining.
But it's
Inventory
but it's
life.
still being, I mean, it's still, well, we're not 100% certain. I mean, that could be part of the strategic plan, but it's not, hasn't been done. And it's not, if they pull the permits to demolish it and pull the permits for new buildings, then I would say we're very close to the very end, but beyond that, I think we need, there's something there. I think there's enough testimony that there's something, but I wouldn't necessarily take it all the way down to,
57,
yeah, to right.
age 57 or
Yeah,
55.
yeah, I would go that far. Well, there's more because the building could continue to be used. It is being used currently. And it could 30 is the midway point. That would be 20%. It doesn't really add that much in terms of appreciation. Even 40, we're getting up to 35%. We went, let's say we went to 50. Wait, this is on 60 here. Okay, yeah, 55 would be 67%. But
Yeah, but we don't have any evidence that these things are actually gonna happen. It's just,
well, there's testimony provided that's part of
Yeah.
the strategic plan. I think that's something. It's not
Yeah.
that it's, but it's also not that it's
Yeah.
100%.
we don't
Could be
have
a
any
plan.
documents.
Yeah, it's gonna be a plan, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna happen. I think I think some impact, there should be some impact. I think there's enough there, there's something, but how much, I don't know. I have no idea what.
Well, when you applied your 20% functional obsolescence previously that you've now removed. Can you talk about your thought process on that and how you arrived at that 20% figure?
That was on the cottages only.
Yes,
That was, like I said, it was strictly based on what we do on residential
oh,
property.
that's right, based on your non-separate building. That's right.
And these properties are approximately at 28% of what they're saying, the minimum of what they would pay to replace them. Which is 72% depreciation over what they're saying the new cost is minimum.
Well,
I'm
that's the-
sorry.
That's the 50 to 100 million.
Oh, yeah,
But
yeah.
that's, I don't know if we can really,
Yeah, I mean, they said it wouldn't be the same exact
Right.
building. It's gonna be a different. It's a different, structure.
It's
So
replacing all the functional obsolescence that they're saying and these have.
yes, but they're gonna be building different types of buildings. They're not just replacing this building with the exact same footprint. So we can't use that cost as a justification. We can't use that $50 to $100 million as a justification for a higher cost new on these buildings. Because they're different buildings, based on what Mr. Rooker said. You're not replacing them with the same building.
it's 12%, there was a 28% depreciation decrease, so it was 40% last year. I don't like when last year's numbers, like,
Well,
should we go to
Yeah,
40?
yeah.
40 years is 35%.
I would be inclined to go back to last year.
Well, that was the issue of then it's everything, we have to look at everything as last year's numbers, so. But looking at that, if we do 40 years, it'll be 35%.
well, I think there's probably a bit of a case to be made for that, because if you think about, okay, so let's say we have a strategic plan. We think we're gonna replace something in 5 years. I mean, honestly, are we gonna be able to replace it in 5 years? No, because you're gonna have to design it and you have to go through all the regulatory aspects. So, it's likely to be, 10 to 15 years. So,
So that
You know,
takes us to, I mean, I don't know if we're gonna go all the way.
so
or
somewhere
if we go-
between,
If we go 15, that's 38. That's 32%. You're doing the outside part of that. I think that's a fair argument. I think that's a fair possibility.
so 15 it said, well, no, what you're
15
saying,
from 15 from now, 15 extra years. So right now we're 23 effective. The effective age of that building is 23, we go to 38. We add 15 to it.
Mhm.
And, or no, because you're saying 15 years away from it, oh, you're going from the bottom, from
the bottom,
60.
from
So
the
we'll go to
bottom,
45.
right,
I was just adding
Yeah.
15 years.
so you're looking at 48% depreciation.
I don't know, I would make it, I don't know, this is really tough. I would do 20 if we're
Okay.
doing that, if we're doing
Uh-huh.
the same, because there's still the possibility they're gonna continue using the
And
building
there's
for the
possibility they may not do.
Yeah, so if you go 20, that's 35%. Anybody have any
I'm cool
other
with it.
thoughts on that?
I'm cool with it.
Evan, do you?
Yeah, no, I agree with that analysis. I think that's
Well,
a reason, yeah, reasonable.
so on assisted living, we're increasing the depreciation. The depreciation will now be 35%
On assisted living, okay.
on assisted living. So if you want to use that as, it'll be functional obsolescence. What do you have right now is 12. So it's 23%.
Mhm.
Okay, you're going to 35%.
Going to 35, not 35 on top of, we're going to, so yeah, 23%.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so nursing, similarly, I think we're thinking the same thing. That was built in 95. that has a value of 6.2 million. I think again, we do the 20-year, I mean, we're supposed to stick with our,
I think we have to be consistent.
yeah, year 40, so nursing. 40, that's a 50-year though. So do we wanna keep it 20 years away from it, or should we just do 10 years, or maybe 15 years, maybe we'll do 15 years on that one.
Okay.
And it's already 20, a year.
Okay.
50. to 35. Wouldn't make much of a difference. I mean, I think we can stick with 40 on this one too, I would say, and that would be 59%.
Okay,
It does increase to 29%.
Okay.
Okay, so 29% functional obsolescence on the nursing.
well, should we just do 20, I mean, functional obsolescence is really a function of design. It's not really a function of the,
So you want to depreciate, should just effective year goal.
well, it's not really a function of the age. I mean, a brand new building can suffer from
Right.
functional obsolescence. So I think for consistency's sake, if we've applied 23% functional obsolescence, shouldn't we be applying 23% functional obsolescence to these other two buildings?
I'm fine with that.
Okay,
We're saying 53% overall.
On
Correct.
that one, yes.
Yes.
26, 53%. And then the last one, the main building is the one that's a little bit trickier because
Yes.
it has the units, which are not as. But it also has some of the other things that are replacing. I don't think there was a suggestion the units were being replaced, but rather. That's the oldest building, that's 1990, there's like 41%. What's being applied? Is that 60 years on that one? Main building. No, 50 years. It's the class C. 50 years of being applied, and it's 33 years old.
pretty much is the depreciation.
How much should we bump that? I don't know, the only problem is that we don't know how much of the building is. You have that information, how much of the building is the nursing?
None of this building is nursing home as far as, this is not the nursing home, this is just units.
Yeah, these are just.
Well, that
the
was suggested
apartments.
by the applicant. I think we can ask the applicants here, I mean, do we have a, or should we? I mean, just,
What we're valuing as the Monticello building is not nursing home or assisted living.
okay, so you're just simply just valuing the
units.
units, okay.
Correct.
So, but the nursing, all the other facilities that we are, we're appreciating, you're not putting as part of the value of the Monticello building. That's only part of the, you're only valuing it in, what do you have, as part of assisted living or nursing, that,
Correct.
everything's in that, okay,
That's a wing that comes off of the main.
okay. Of that, okay. Okay, so then any thoughts on, so Monticello, these were the challenges. Original buildings, small predominantly 1-bedroom units, no laundry, no assigned parking, no supplemental storage. Combinations began in 2012 and continue with combination monthly fee revenue, okay, 8-foot ceilings. PTAG heating and cooling units, smaller desirable window openings, dated design, stick frame non-concrete floors. Non-ideal sound insulation limitations on generator support. Anything there that we should increase beyond the 41% depreciation, because the fact it is 33 years old? Is there anything there that we should do further? Evan, do you have what's your thought?
I don't have a strong view on that
Okay.
in particular.
What else? Karen, you. Then my suggestion is to keep the 41% unless because we're really doing it on the other one, so let's just, okay. So that one's gonna be unchanged. Now, so that's our 5 commercial buildings, now the residences.
Wait a minute.
Don't the combined, so we only disregard lines 2 and 3.
All right.
Okay, so
So
all,
wait,
yeah.
wait. So what is our total assessment now on these buildings?
I don't know, we have to get those
Okay.
from when we. I mean, let's go through the residences and then we'll
Okay,
get
all right.
those, because they're all one, it all goes together,
Okay.
so. Okay, so the cottages. Depreciation on these goes from. The 1990 units are 13%, 2016 is 1%. These are average, should be considered an average,
Yes.
average B,
Condition.
average condition.
Yes. Oh, and average,
Well,
average quality also, B,
plus-
B and B plus two, depending on the.
And then the. Okay. B plus, and then the, So these are, again, that would be, so these appreciations are not, are they coming from? Or is what the residential depreciation, it's the residential depreciation to use for the. Anybody with,
Double check that because it's hard to understand. Some of these. I mean, we've got 11% on these ones that were built in 2000. You've got 12% on the ones that were built in 1999, and then you're only at 13%, the ones built in 1990.
Yeah, the depreciation curve is like
Oh,
this.
yeah, yeah,
this is
So,
like all the residential.
There just happened to be a percent change between those 2 years,
right,
but then
okay. Do you have that in here?
the depreciation schedule.
Yes, on
do
this,
not.
you do not, okay.
Okay, so. On those then, on the residences. Obviously, there's the argument because the functional obsolescence was there, the 20%. But as the assessor noted, the reason why they had it was because of the inseverability of those, which ended goes away. And this is not it's not a residence either. We're doing the cost
Right.
approach.
You can also see though, in this building permit activity, they are having to do some pretty significant updates. Ollie, I'm not sure if these are, I mean, some of these are these apartments. It's very hard to, obviously parse this out.
And then
These were all 20%.
the extra up to last year. But that was again because, right, like in any residence, that's the idea. When we've had it, like a big estate has a main house and then second, third, fourth houses were all 20% on it. But should we apply, the other question is, should we apply residential depreciation to them or should we be applying the commercial? I mean, they're being used as residents.
Well, I mean, they based his cost on, he should be using the depreciation table from the. He based his cost on residential, so he should be doing his depreciation based on the residential. I guess that the other thing, if we just kind of walk through this and we say, well, no functional obsolescence, but then I do find this compelling. You've got a 26% increase in their value and really these other, I mean, are we?
We'll have to see what the value is total, but Blake went up
Okay.
22% last year. I mean, Blake went up 26% over 2 years as well. I think there shouldn't have been a reduction last year. That was the issue. That's why it's gone up so much. And whether, I don't know how much, I think there's gonna be our number is gonna come down a bit from those couple buildings we produced,
Well,
but
yeah,
do you wanna see what that number?
yeah, I'd like to know what that is.
It's
And-
144,062,726 for the improvements.
Okay,
And I can tell you what the old number was. 148. 423, 400,
so we've only come down, we've
4
come down
million.
$5 million.
4.4.
I think that some adjustment is appropriate for the residences. We're using, I mean, it is difficult. This one's hard because we're using commercial on one side, we're using residential on the other side. The argument has been made that these are not as desirable, whether or not we can actually tell that's actually the case or not, but I wouldn't go so far as 20%, but
Well, I mean, there is still this issue of non-severability, and you know, believed it before, but then of course, the appraisers didn't deal with it in their appraisals, but you do. I mean, there is a lack of freedom to resell these units, and,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, did you just, I mean, you felt after reading their appraisals, they're just looking at everything as one property based on its income approach. Since you're not doing that, right, and you're looking at it from a standpoint of their individual contributions, right, to the whole, then I think you have to consider it because you're having to consider something that they didn't have to consider because they're really basing it on the income approach and the sales comparison approach as a whole. So it's already factored in there for them. But you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying, and I'm not saying that they are severable.
Okay.
Because we took that off. I'm saying that it doesn't apply to this type of property because we use it on estates where there are multiple homes.
Right.
It's a totally different situation that we shouldn't have used it in this situation.
So what category are you using for your cost approach? Are you using like a duplex or are you using for these individual units?
That's a good question.
Also a single family, it's
I'm gonna have to plug. Single family attached. Basically duplex,
Right.
yes. For the ones that are that,
Yeah.
except the ones that are single family.
Right. And so you use a single family.
Use Single family,
Same.
one story.
Is there a added value or decreased value in the fact that if you buy them, you have to buy all of them, you can't buy some more? That's, I mean, there's some, yeah.
Yeah.
How much? I don't think it's 20, I don't. 20% supply to that, this is, again, they're renting, I mean, it's they're part of that whole facility. I think a part of, I think it would be, I think it should have all been valued as commercial. It's not, because if you're valuing the individual units, not building as commercial. But what we have, I think is fine, residential.
Well, I think there is an issue because it is a single family or it is a duplex. But it's not, right? Because you cannot sell it as a duplex. And so you've got to, I think there is something that needs to be considered there for those units. And, I think you've done it with other, larger tracts of land that have homes, second homes that can't be divided off. So I do think that, even though the other appraisers didn't address it because they were relying on other approaches that had that, the functional aspect of that built into their sales or their income approach, because you're relying on the cost approach. It's unavoidable. You've got to consider that somehow.
I would suggest 10%. I don't know if it should be 20 to be uniform, but we're not really uniform, but
Well, I can't tell you what it should be, but I can tell you that if you're using 20% in other instances, then if you're only gonna use, if you're not gonna use 20% here, when you have even more units, then you've got to have good justification. Because I just think for consistency's sake.
but then we don't do it for like an apartment complex.
But if he's doing a cost approach on an
Right.
apartment complex, he's using an apartment complex model.
Yeah. I think we have to come up with a
I mean,
number somehow.
Not if it's. not if the style is different.
You mean
The
on,
apartment complex is built like the Blue Ridge,
oh,
then of course not.
Mhm.
If it's built like townhouses, then we still would not be using a functional.
right, but you'd also be doing an income approach.
Right, but we, on the cost side, we wouldn't.
Right. And you do a sale and comparison approach. So then you've got those three approaches and those other two approaches have that factored in.
Well, there is a distinction, I was just thinking, between the farmsteads with the multiple buildings, because these are easily leasable, like, what if if you have a farmstead, you can't just go, I guess you could, you're not limited. I was just thinking if you're limited on leasing those.
Yeah, my recollection also on the approaches and whether they're available to sort of cover for each other's weaknesses is that the US PAP instructions say that you should, look at and develop the approach that you believe is going to be most effective, and then the other approaches can be used to either support that or not. But if it's not there, I'm not sure it's necessarily a problem. It just sort of, we need to be aware that there may be information that it would have revealed that is not going to be revealed for us. But a singular approach can be used to support the appraisal. It's sufficient.
So, I mean, this is our last piece, so it's just a matter of what is I think, do we reduce it? And if we do, by how much?
So what is the evidence presented that, I mean, just being devil's advocate here or trying to ask questions that would help us get to an answer. What is the piece of evidence that's presented by the applicant, which overcomes the presumption of correctness?
Well, the arguments that they made specific to this issue is functional obsolescence, market challenges with cottages. That's the market challenges with cottages was the issue, the argument. And that cottages are less desirable than apartments. Prospective residents want to be under the roof of main buildings, with dining and amenities easily accessible. Greater demand for apartments. They have longer, more reliable wait lists for apartments. And there's there's an external economic obsolescence argument that they have operational challenges with cottages in general because they're not under the same roof. So they have extra costs, there's extra costs. So that's an argument has been made the cottages are not as valuable, let's say, as the apartments for their purposes, but
So I think they probably have made the case that they're not as valuable. What's the ask, I guess, as how much valuable they're.
well, it sounds like they wanted the 20% back.
Yeah.
So that's
But have they carried the burden that it's actually 20%? Because the assessor has basically said the earlier data is wrong, and I corrected it when it came to my attention. So to me, that's evidence that would tend to stand in opposition to returning to the 20%. To going back to the 20%, it's like the least likely in my view, because we have such a thorough explanation from the assessor's office about why that number was incorrect and adjusted.
yeah, it doesn't apply to this situation. The reason why they applied it, but
Yeah.
I still, it feels like, I don't know, it just, because again, if we're doing the cost approach for these specific houses, if they were on separate lots, that's one thing. And my suggestion, for whatever it's worth, is I wouldn't do necessarily 20%, but I would say 10%. To reflect the fact that they are not separate, but at the same time, they can be leased, and they are being leased, and there's a wait list, so. I'm just throwing it out there, but I don't know if there's anybody else has
What does
any.
that change it to?
The value, what's the improvement value, total improvement value?
I can tell you, I'll get the computer to do all the work. You're talking with 10%.
10%, yeah. I think it's about 2 million. I think. Yeah. Because the residences are relatively,
I got you.
they're a much smaller portion.
You're talking about 10% on top of the 13 right here.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be 10% on top of 13, 1%.
That brings it down. What did I tell you before? 144, 4, I think. It's 141. 4, so it's about $3 million.
$141 million.
That's just for the building. though.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Okay.
that's just for the building improvement value, so
Uh-huh.
it would reduce about 7 million total. 7.4 total, I think. So we
From the
come down
original
from the original values, would be that
It's
152,
actually just under 7 million.
just under 7.
So 148,423 23 to 141,491.
Anybody else have any other suggestions, or should we have a motion on this?
I guess the only other thing is, did we feel like we've satisfactorily covered the argument by the applicant about the condition across the buildings?
Well, the condition was everything is average, just the quality was excellent as to
Sorry,
the
excuse me.
commercial
Yeah, the quality.
structures.
Yeah.
I don't think there was anything. We didn't get into that. I don't think there was evidence provided as to the quality. And excellent quality is not the same. If the assessor, I'm gonna maybe ask, but the assessor's quality, because on the residences, they're just doing B plus, like they're doing B level, which is pretty, on residential parts, it's pretty average,
Mm-hmm.
so.
Okay, yeah, if everyone feels like that part's been addressed, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure, since they highlighted it in their summary, that we're.
I'm sorry, Evan, I didn't mean to.
Go ahead, no,
I'm still not quite satisfied that we have justified why we would use only a 10% functional obsolescence on this particular situation, where in other situations, we're using a 20% functional obsolescence. And I don't think that we've, sufficiently addressed that.
So they're not apartments though, I mean, they're not apartments, but I feel like the farmsteads are different, that's. Unless they're applied, I don't know what other situation they're applied to.
You're applying it to other buildings that can't be sold separately from the main tract.
In a situation where it is normally purchased by somebody who is buying a single family home. This is a totally different situation. Somebody's not buying a single family home with a whole bunch of extra homes in it. They're buying a continuing care community. with
Right.
A whole bunch of units in it. So it's just a totally different situation in which it applies in this one and not.
Well, it is and it isn't, because you have used only a cost approach, right? And so you haven't developed the other approaches that actually, might have been able to give you some evidence for, or some support for that measure of functional obsolescence. So since you don't have any support from the other approaches, then, I feel if you're going to deviate from what you've done in other instances, even though they are somewhat different, the issue's the same, the non-severability issue is the same, even though they're different types of properties. I just really struggle with that, we're not treating them the same as we are the other, even though they're other, I understand what you're saying. Do we have any, we don't have any, what about like, Have you applied a measure of functional obsolescence to properties like the Woods cottages or those, cottages that are out on, oh goodness, Woodburn Road? I think there's 7 or 8 of them, and they're 7 or 8 cottages on a single lot. Did you do a cost approach on those and apply any functional obsolescence? Because that would be the most comparable.
I would say it's not at all comparable, not in the least comparable to this property. So whether we do the 20% or
Right.
not on those,
Right.
I don't think the property is all comparable to this property. In any way.
Right. Because this is a large. I'm just saying theoretically that the non-severability,
I agree.
so,
I go over there a lot. It's got a guard shack. People who live in the cottages go have dinner at the dining room. They go to the chapel. They have friends in other parts of the building, so it really is a community. And you have healthcare right there, so it's, people move there because they want the life care. You know,
Yeah, so if I understand you, Bob, like you're saying the difference here is the life care sort of layer that's added on, and that's sufficient to justify the deviation.
it's a unique place in the county. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, apartments have services and facilities, but the other items and the programming and the healthcare stuff would certainly be a basis for differentiation in my eyes.
Well, let's what's the difference between the 20%? What are our numbers if we have 20% or 10% in terms of total numbers?
Without putting the numbers in, I would say it would be, it was about $3 million difference for the 10%. It would be the same.
Yeah, so right now, with the 10% with the commercial, what was our total number again? Like 140, no,
141.
the total number with the land value.
Oh, with the land value, sorry. $53, $238, $300. This is with the 10% on the 10%.
Do another one, it would be closer to 150. I think this is our last, it's just a this between the 10 and 20%. Is there either do we have a motion or does one of these carry today between us? So I'm inclined to do the 10, but that's my, but I don't know who else. I mean, if it was 153, 238, 300 was a 10. Karen, I think you still feel strong with the 20. 150 is more appropriate.
to be consistent. I'd just like them to be consistent. So, and I understand Peter's argument. Just out of curiosity, what's your cost new on these cottages? Cause you broke them down and did them all individually.
Correct.
So what's your cost new, or your cost new per square foot?
I don't have per square foot.
Oh.
I have that the cost new per, on average per cottage is $428,500.
Just thinking about how that number was derived, that would be if you were building, that many cottages actually on different parcels with all the logistics and challenges of that, right? Not building a subdivision.
We don't take into account the number of, a a builder could be building 20 houses in a subdivision, and we don't value them differently than if one was being built at a time. So.
Got it. Although a builder certainly would, right? They would certainly approach, you get economies of scale and that type of thing. I guess what I'm trying to point out is like the severability analysis cuts both ways. The fact that they're all there together from a cost approach might be an advantageous fact.
About $232 a square foot. At least for like one of the 1990 units. Was $232.
So I'm in favor of going to 10. I don't think there's we don't have the most scientific explanation for how we got there, but I think it's better than the explanation for going to 20. And I think it's reflective of fair market value.
Do you want to make the motion?
Sure. Do I need to include the number there for that part of it?
I think we need just the total value, but I think it breaks down between improvement and we've been doing improvement in land. The land is the same. An argument there.
But I don't think we've addressed their other concern about the equitability. We haven't really discussed that yet.
The equitability of, but that's again to the change. I think that's the discussion was with respect to the change. They also reduced this one last year. They reduced this one last year. They didn't reduce the other ones last. I mean, there's an average. It has gone up higher than the other one.
So this assessment would be 10% higher than the 2021 assessment. Is that correct? It was like 136 million.
That was 136,777.
So it'll be about 10% higher.
What was our
Over a 2-year period.
Also, isn't that equitability argument entirely answered by the explanation from the assessor's office that they received a bunch of information as a consequence of the lawsuit that they didn't get with respect to all of the other I mean, I think the foundation or the basic premise for, hey, our assessment is out of line with the other similarly situated communities is that the assessor's office had the same scope of information submitted in support of the mass appraisal technique. That didn't happen here. So to me, I think that's a fair explanation.
But it is 10% over 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so the numbers were, it was 150, so the total was,
I can give you those if you need. So, correct. That would be the total value. The improvement value would be 141,491,8. And then the land unchanged at 11,746,500.
So that's $141,948.
$141,491,8.
191.
800.
800, correct.
Okay.
And the total again was 153, 238, 300.
Correct.
Okay, we have a motion.
So I will move to reduce the improvement value to 141,491,800, and the resulting total value as 238,300.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Make the motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, we are adjourned. It is 1:14 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Mayo. I'm going to stop recording and I'm going to close out the Zoom.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.